Hello, night listener, and welcome to Little Nightmare. I'm Emma, and tonight I'll be keeping you company to help you fall asleep. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Story 1. The Wind Began It. A low susurration through the drying cornfields that surrounded the town of Harvest Mill. It wasn't a violent wind, not yet, but a whispering one. It slipped through the half-open window of my cruiser, carrying the scent of loam and decay, of pumpkins ripening, and leaves turning to dust. It slid into the silence between the dispatcher's staticky reports, a sound that seemed to shape words just below the threshold of hearing. It was October 28th, and the wind spoke of things that were coming home. The decorations had been up for weeks, but now, in these final days, they took on a different aspect. The jack-o'-lanterns on every porch step, their grins carved by cheerful hands, seemed to leer in the twilight. The synthetic cobwebs strung across bushes gathered real moisture from the evening fog, glistening like ancient lace. I drove past them all. Officer Greta Cole, a trainee with the Harvest Mill Sheriff's Department, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I was 24 and still believed that order was a force you could impose upon the world with enough will and a clean, pressed uniform. That was before the wind brought the news about the girl in the corn maze. Her name was Lily McAllister. She'd been 9 years old, dressed as a fairy princess, her costume-s tinsel wings torn and mud-stained. They found her at the heart of the McCready Farm-s annual attraction, a place designed for playful scares, not for this. The corn stalks, still and silent, had watched it happen. The only thing taken from her was a single plastic pumpkin bucket, the kind you carry for candy. It was empty. Back at the station, the air was thick with coffee and dread. Sheriff Benny Morty, a man built like an oak tree and just as immovable, put a massive hand on my shoulder. His face was grim. "It's him, Greta. The Harvest Man," he back. The Harvest Man. A name the press had coined 2 years ago, after 3 children vanished over the Halloween season. Their bodies were never found. The only man ever connected to the crimes was Darren Crow, a reclusive taxidermist with the dead eyes of a stuffed trout. They nailed him on forensics from his workshop, things I couldn't think about while looking at the half-eaten caramel apple on my desk. He was locked away in the state penitentiary, a 40-minute drive through dying countryside. But the legend persisted that he hadn't worked alone. He only talked to a woman, Benny said, his voice low. Thinks men are too brutish, too simple. He's a manipulative son of a bitch, Greta. He gets inside your head. You go in, you get what we need on this new predator, this Leonard, and you get out. You are a conduit. You are not his friend. You are not his confessor. Do you understand? I understood ambition. I understood the need to prove I was more than just a rookie who could write a speeding ticket. I understood the image of a little girl in a muddy fairy costume, an image that was now burned onto the back of my eyelids. I understand, sir. The drive to the prison, was a tour through Halloween-esque Gothic heartland. The harvest moon hung low and orange, a great, watchful eye. Cornfields stretched to the horizon, their dried stalks rattling like bones. Scarecrows, propped on their crosses, seemed to turn their burlap heads as I passed. I felt a childish urge to roll up my windows, to lock out the creeping cold that smelled of wood smoke and distant snow. Darren Crow was smaller than I'd imagined. He sat in the interrogation room, his hands cuffed to a bolted-down table, looking like a librarian who misplaced his glasses. His eyes, though. Benny was right about his eyes. They were the color of a winter sky, and they held a profound, patient stillness. "Officer Cole," he said. His voice was soft, almost melodic. "Greta, may I call you Greta? You have the look of a Greta. Solid, old world." I said nothing. I placed the file on the table, the crime scene photos of Lily McAllister face down. "It's Halloween soon," he murmured, looking past me at the bare, gray wall as if he could see through it. "The veil is thinning. Can you feel it? The air gets hungry. It's the one night of the year when the dead are given a guest pass, and the living play dress-up as monsters. A fascinating symmetry, don't you think? A little girl is dead, Mr. Crow. Crow, such an ugly name. A carrion bird." He finally looked at me, and a faint smile touched his lips. "But you may hear about the harvest man, or rather, the new one, the apprentice who didn't get the memo that the master had retired. His name, his location, how he chooses them. It's not a how, Greta. It's a when. He chooses them now. In the season. He is a creature of the ritual, like me." He leaned forward, the chains on his wrists clinking softly. "I can give him to you, but a gift requires a gift. That is the oldest rule of All Hallows' Eve." And so the dangerous exchange began. His voice was a hypnotic spiral, always returning to the same narrative core, the same obsessive thought. He spoke in stories, in folklore. He told me about Samhain, about the Celts who believed that on this night, the spirits of the dead and other, less savory things could walk freely among the living. He talked about the jack-o'-lantern, originally a turnip, carved to ward off a man named Stingy Jack, a deceitful soul doomed to walk the earth with only a burning coal in a hollowed-out root to light his way. We carve faces into pumpkins to scare away the things that go bump in the night, he said, his gaze unwavering. But what if the thing that goes bump in the night is the one holding the knife? In return for his riddles, he asked for things. A report on the weather. The winner of the local pumpkin carving contest. The brand of candy my mother handed out to trick-or-treaters. The small details, he said. They are the stitches that hold the fabric of the world together. I just want to feel the texture. I reported everything to Benny. He playing you, Greta. He'd grumble, rubbing his tired face. He a spider, and he spinning a web for you out of words. The days bled together, each one shorter and colder than the last. October 29th. The 30th, the town was a riot of forced festivity. Orange and black crepe paper fluttered in the wind. Children practiced their scary faces in schoolyards, but beneath the sugar rush excitement was a current of pure, undiluted fear. Parents held their children's hands tighter. Porch lights were checked and rechecked. Darren's clues were maddeningly arcane. "Look for the one who doesn't blink," he said one day. "The scarecrow that watches the road, not the field." Another time, he likes the shiny wrappers, the ones that crackle when you tear them open. He takes them as trophies. Then, on the afternoon of the 30th, another child went missing. A boy this time, 11 years old, last seen in a store-bought zombie costume. His name was Timmy. His plastic candy bucket, shaped like a skull, was found on the edge of the old cemetery, empty. The station was chaos. Benny was barking orders, organizing search parties. The wind had picked up, howling around the building's corners, a real banshee now. I sat in the quiet of the evidence room, looking at the two empty candy buckets, Lily's orange pumpkin, Timmy's white skull. They were offerings, taken but left empty. It hit me then, a cold certainty that had nothing to do with the October chill seeping through the walls. The ritual. Darren kept talking about the ritual. I drove back to the prison as the sun was dying. The sky, a bloody smear behind the skeletal trees. I didn't wait for his games. "The buckets are empty," I said, slamming my hands on the table. "Why? What is the offering for?" Darren looked pleased, like a teacher whose slowest student had finally grasped a simple equation. "The candy is for the children. It's a bribe, a payment to the little spirits so they'll pass by your door. But what do you offer to the older, hungrier things? The things that were old when the Celts were young. You can buy them off with a miniature chocolate bar." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The bucket must be emptied of the sweet, trivial things. It must be made ready, hollowed out, a vessel. On Halloween night, it will be filled with something else, something real." "Filled with what?" I demanded, my heart hammering against my ribs. "With what's inside," he said simply. "When you carve a pumpkin, you scoop out the seeds and the pulp, the messy, slimy guts of it. You make it clean and empty, ready for the light. He is preparing the vessels, hollowing them out. The taking of the candy is just the first step, the promise of a more substantial filling to come." The horror of it washed over me, cold and suffocating. He wasn't just killing them. He was preparing them like Darren prepared his animals, making them into vessels. For what? "His name is Leonard," Darren said, so softly I almost missed it. Leonard Voss. He was the caretaker at the cemetery. He thought my work was art. He wanted to learn. I showed him a little. But he lacks subtlety. He has no patience for the ritual. He only understands the hunger. I was already on my feet, my chair screeching back. Where? The old Henderson funeral home. It has been closed for years. no one thinks to look among the dead for the dead. He smiled, a thin, bloodless thing. A happy Halloween, Greta. Mind the tricks. The treats are often bitter. Benny mobilized the entire department. We surrounded the decrepit Victorian that housed the former funeral home. It was a perfect Halloween tableau, with its peeling paint, turrets clawing at the bruised twilight sky, and a wraparound porch littered with the real corpses of fallen leaves. It needed no decoration. It was the source of the darkness, not a parody of it. We went in at dusk on Halloween night. The air inside was frigid and still, smelling of dust, formaldehyde, and something sweetly rotten, like a pumpkin left to spoil in the sun. Our flashlights cut beams through the profound darkness, illuminating dusty velvet drapes and overturned furniture. The only sound was the crunch of our boots on grit and the frantic thudding of my own heart. We found the children in the basement preparation room. They were alive. Lily and Timmy, still in their costumes, their faces pale and smudged with dirt. They stood perfectly still, side by side, in the center of the room. Their eyes were wide, unblinking, glazed with a terror so absolute it looked like tranquility. In their hands, they held their empty candy buckets, and standing behind them, a scalpel in his hand, was a tall, gaunt man in a dark suit. Leonard Voss. His face was long and pale, his hair slicked back. He looked like an undertaker from a forgotten time. "You ray too early," he said, his voice reedy with disappointment. "The witching hour hasn't he come. The vessels aren't he ready to receive the light." What followed was a blur of shouted commands, of Leonard moving with an unnatural speed, of a struggle that felt like fighting a shadow. Benny was the one who tackled him, bringing him down with a grunt of effort. As they cuffed Leonard, who was now weeping about ruined rituals and offended spirits, I rushed to the children. They didn't respond to their names. They didn't flinch at my touch. They just stood there, hollowed out, their souls seemingly scooped clean like so much pumpkin pulp. They were empty vessels, waiting for a light that would never come. The aftermath was a media circus. Benny was a hero. I was the bright young officer whose profiling had broken the case. They had Leonard Voss, who babbled about ancient gods and the thinning veil. They had their closure, but I couldn't sleep. The wind still whispered. The image of those children, their emptiness, was more horrifying than any corpse. I had won. I had confronted the external threat, but I had not escaped the manipulative games of my unlikely informant. A week after Halloween, a package arrived for me at the station. No return address. Inside, nestled in crinkly packing paper, was a small, expertly carved jack-o'-lantern. It wasn't made from a pumpkin, but from a different, denser, darker gourd. The face was not a simple grin. It was a masterpiece of subtle horror, a visage of such profound sorrow, and knowing that it made my skin crawl. There was no note. That night, I placed the gourd on my kitchen table. The wind moaned outside, a lonely, desolate sound. I lit a small candle, and my hand trembling, placed it inside the carved gourd. The light that flickered through the eye holes was not the warm, cheerful glow of a pumpkin candle. It was a cold, pale, phosphorescent light. And in that sickly luminescence, I saw it. The face in the gourd seemed to shift, the sorrowful expression twisting into something else. Something that looked like Darren Crow's faint, knowing smile. He had given me my gift. He had given me Leonard Voss. And now he had given me this, a vessel of his own making, a piece of his mind, his art, his darkness, sitting in my home, a treat for my efforts. I had been the conduit, just as Benny warned. But I had carried his words, his ideas, his worldview, and now I could not get them out. They were inside me, seeds planted in the fertile soil of my fear, waiting for the right season to sprout. I stood up. The wind whispered secrets against my window pane, secrets about hollow men and hungry things, and the long, dark year, until the veil thinned once more. I walked away from the table, from the thing with the cold, knowing light in its eyes. I walked out of my kitchen, down the hall, and into the darkness of my bedroom. I did not look back. I never look back. The wind does the looking for me now. It is always watching. It is always hungry. And it is only October. The uniform hangs in my closet. A crisp blue skin I can no longer bear to wear. The town calls me a hero. They don't know the price of that heroism. They don't feel the chill that has taken root in my bones, a permanent resident of my body. Benny has noticed. He calls it post-traumatic stress. He suggests I talk to someone. He doesn't understand that I am talking to someone every day in the silent, one-sided conversations I have with the memory of Darren Crow's voice. My days are now spent in the quiet of the evidence room, a self-imposed exile. I sort through cold cases, my fingers tracing the faded ink on reports that are decades old. I am looking for a pattern, a thread that connects this town to a deeper, older darkness. I look for other missing children, other seasons of unexplained loss. I find them. A boy in 1978, vanished on Mischief Night. A set of twins in 1955, last seen near the old stone bridge on the edge of town. Their cases are dusty and closed, labeled as runaways or tragic accidents. But I see the hollow spaces where the answers should be. I see the empty buckets. The gourd remains on my kitchen table. I cannot bring myself to move it. The cold light it emits is faint, barely visible during the day. But at night, it paints the walls with a sickly pallor. Sometimes, in the periphery of my vision, the carved face seems to be watching me, its expression shifting from sorrow to a kind of grim amusement. I have stopped lighting the candle. The darkness inside it feels safer than the light it produces. Today, a new file lands on my desk. It's a missing person report from a neighboring county. A teenage girl, last seen hiking near a patch of woods known for its strange, gnarled oak trees and local legends. The report is standard, but the item noted as missing from her backpack makes my blood run cold. A small, woven basket she used to collect fallen acorns. It was found empty, perched on a stump, at a crossroads. My hand trembles as I pick up the phone. I need to call the sheriff's department over there, offer my unofficial assistance. I need to ask if they have any recluses in their area, any taxidermists or funeral home workers or quiet men who prefer the company of the dead. But I already know what I will do. I will get in my car, my personal car, and I will drive there myself. I will walk those woods. I will feel the wind through the trees, and I will listen, because the wind is still talking. It never stopped. It tells me that Leonard Voss was a crude student, a clumsy imitation. It tells me that the real artist is still at work, patient and meticulous, his hands forever steady, his vision forever clear from a cell 40 minutes away. He is the master, and he is still teaching. He is teaching me. I am no longer Officer Greta Cole, who believed in order and clean uniforms. I am a student of the hollow things. I am a collector of empty vessels. And I know, with a certainty that feels like a shard of ice in my heart, that this is only the beginning. The harvest is not over. It has only just begun. The woods in the next county were a different kind of quiet. It wasn't peaceful. It was a held breath. The gnarled oaks formed a tight canopy, their branches like twisted arms locking fingers against the gray sky. The local deputy, a young man with a nervous swallow, left me at the trailhead with a warning about getting turned around before dusk. I didn't need his warning. I knew these woods would not let me go until they were ready. I found the crossroads myself, a place where two dirt paths bisected in a small, muddy clearing. The stump was there, just as the report described, and on it sat the small, woven basket. It was empty, of course, a vessel waiting. I didn't touch it. I just stood and felt the silence press in around me. The wind moved through the high branches, but it didn't make a sound. It was just a cold pressure against my cheek. That was when I saw it. Tucked into a crevice in the stump, almost invisible against the damp, dark wood, was a single piece of candy. Not a modern, shiny-wrapped bar. It was an old-fashioned peppermint, the kind that comes wrapped in a simple, crinkly cellophane that crackles when you tear it open. He likes the shiny wrappers, the ones that crackle. He takes them as trophies. But this wasn't taken. This was left, a message, a callback. My heart wasn't hammering anymore. It was a slow, cold, heavy thing in my chest. This wasn't Leonard Voss's work. This was meticulous. This was a man who understood symbolism, who curated his crime scenes like an artist signs a painting. Darren Crow was right. Leonard was a blunt instrument. This was a scalpel. I drove back to the prison without calling Benny. I didn't go through the main entrance. I used the side door, the one for attorneys and official visitors, flashing my badge with an authority I no longer felt. The guards knew me now. They nodded me through with a kind of pitying respect. Darren was waiting in the same room, his hands folded on the table. He looked up as I entered, and his winter sky eyes held no surprise. Only a deep, unsettling satisfaction. "You went for a walk in the woods," he said. His voice was a soft rustle, like dry leaves. The oaks there are very old. They have deep roots. They remember things. I didn't sit. I placed the peppermint candy on the table between us. The crinkly wrapper seemed obscenely loud in the quiet room. "He's still out there," I said. It wasn't a question. Darren smiled, a slow, gradual thawing of his features. "There is no he, Greta. Not in the singular way you mean. That is the lesson you have yet to learn. It is a tradition, a lineage. I was not the first. Leonard was a failed branch, a dead limb, but the tree itself is very much alive." He looked at the candy. A calling card, an invitation to a more discerning palate. He knows you are listening now. He knows you appreciate the finer details. Who is he? My voice was a whisper, stripped of all its professional armor. That is the wrong question, Crow chided gently. The question is not who, but what. What is he becoming? What is he inviting you to become? He leaned back, the chains whispering against the table. You feel the hollowing in yourself, don't you? The old you, the solid, old-world Greta, is being scooped out, making room. It is an uncomfortable process, but necessary for the light to get in. I turned and left him there. I walked out of the prison, past the guards, into the flat, gray afternoon. The wind caught me in the parking lot, and this time I heard it. It wasn't a whisper. It was a word, clear and cold as ice. Soon, I got in my car and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes stared back, wide and shadowed. I looked for the solid, old-world Greta, but all I could see was the hollow. A vessel waiting. The harvest had indeed begun, and I was no longer just a student. I was part of the crop. The file on the missing hiker remained open on my passenger seat, a stark, official contrast to the turmoil churning inside me. I didn't drive back to the station. I drove home, the route now a numb, automatic ritual. My apartment was dark and still. The gourd sat on the table, a dark silhouette against the deepening twilight. I didn't turn on the lights. I stood in the middle of my living room, feeling the emptiness of the space echo, the emptiness growing within me. The phone rang, shattering the silence. It was Benny. His voice was gruff with concern. Greta, heard you took a personal day. Everything all right? I looked at the gourd. I'm fine, Benny, just tired. There's a thing at the mayor's office tomorrow. For the kids, Lily and Timmy. They want us there, the heroes. He tried to sound jovial, but it fell flat. How are they? I asked, my voice hollow. The children. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The doctors say they're physically fine, but they're quiet. They don't talk much. They just stare. He cleared his throat. It'll be good for them to see you. A familiar face. A familiar face. I wondered if my face was still familiar to me. I agreed to be there and hung up, the promise feeling like a lie on my tongue. The next day, I put on my uniform for the last time. The fabric felt alien against my skin, a costume for a person I no longer was. The mayor's office was a blur of forced smiles, flashing cameras, and the cloying sweetness of celebratory cake. Lily and Timmy were there, flanked by their relieved but shell-shocked parents. They wore new clothes, their faces were clean, but their eyes were the same as they had been in the funeral home basement. Distant, glazed, hollowed out. When Lily saw me, she didn't smile. She just walked over, her movements stiff, and handed me a small, lumpy object wrapped in orange construction paper. I took it, my fingers clumsy. It was a crayon drawing. A stick figure of a woman with a badge stood next to a large, black square with 2 yellow dots for eyes. Above it, a swirling mass of black lines represented the wind. There were no other features, no sun, no house, no happy faces. Just the woman, the thing with the eyes, and the chaotic wind. Her mother gave me a teary, grateful smile. She's been drawing that all week. She calls it the lady and the night. I looked from the drawing to Lily's vacant eyes, and a cold understanding settled over me. She wasn't drawing me as a hero. She was drawing me as a part of the darkness. The lady who stood beside the hollow thing. The one who listened to the wind. I left the event early, the drawing clutched in my hand. I drove straight to the prison. I didn't request a visit. I just stood outside the high, barbed wire fence, looking up at the narrow, slit-like windows. I knew he was in there, feeling the satisfaction of a prophecy fulfilled. He had hollowed out those children, but he had also hollowed out me. He had turned me into a vessel for his truth, a conduit for his dark gospel. I was his greatest work of art, walking free. The wind picked up, whipping my hair across my face. It carried the scent of decaying leaves and distant rain. It whispered of the coming winter, of the long silence under the snow, of the things that sleep and dream beneath the frozen earth. It was not a threat. It was a promise of continuity. I got back in my car and drove away from the prison, away from the town, toward the old oak woods in the next county. I didn't know what I was looking for. A sign, a purpose, an end to the story. But stories like this don't end. They just change hands. The uniform was gone, folded, and left in a box in my closet. I was something else now. The lady and the night. A student of the hollow things, forever listening, forever waiting for the wind to speak my name. The road into the next county was a winding ribbon of cracked asphalt, bleeding into the encroaching forest. I parked my car where the pavement gave way to gravel, and then to dirt. The woods were darker this time, the silence heavier, as if they had been expecting me. I walked without a flashlight, letting my eyes adjust to the gloom. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rot. I found myself back at the crossroads. The basket was gone. In its place, on the same moss-eaten stump, was a small, dead bird, a sparrow. It had been placed with care, its wings neatly folded. There was no visible wound, no violence done to its tiny body. It was just empty, a perfect, feathered vessel. I knelt in the cold mud, my knees sinking into the soft ground. I didn't pray. I didn't cry. I just looked at the bird, and I understood. This was the next lesson. This was the progression. From children to a girl to this small, insignificant life. It was a demonstration of scale, of omnipotence. The hollowing could be as grand as a human soul, or as minute as a sparrow's. The artistry was in the act itself, the creation of nothingness. A sound made me look up, a rustle, not from the wind, but from a deliberate movement. Across the clearing, at the edge of the tree line, a figure stood watching me. It was a man, tall and thin, his features obscured by the deep shadows. He didn't move. He simply observed, a silent sentinel to my understanding. I felt no fear, only a cold, resonant recognition. This was him, the next one, the inheritor of the tradition. He didn't approach. He didn't speak. After a long moment, he simply turned and melted back into the trees, becoming one with the darkness from which he came. I made no move to follow. The chase was over. That was the old way, the way of Officer Cole. My role was different now. I stood, my pants soaked with mud, and looked down at the dead bird. Then I looked at my own hands. They were clean, but I felt the stain of this knowledge on them, a patina that would never wash off. I was not here to catch the artist. I was here to appreciate the art, to bear witness to the hollowing of the world. I turned and walked back to my car, leaving the sparrow on its altar. The drive home was a silent, dreamlike passage. When I entered my apartment, the gourd on the table seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light, though no candle burned within it. The sorrow on its face had shifted. It now held a look of serene, terrible completion. I picked up the phone and dialed the prison. I requested a visit for the following day. The voice on the other end confirmed it without question. They were used to me now. I sat in the dark and waited for the dawn. The wind outside had stilled, holding its breath. The harvest was ongoing, and I had taken my place in the field, not as a reaper, but as a keeper of the silent, empty things left behind. The line between the hunter and the harvested had finally, completely, disappeared. The visiting room felt different this time. Smaller, the air thicker. Darren Crow sat, as he always did, a portrait of calm in his concrete world. He didn't speak as I sat down. He simply watched me, his eyes reading the new lines on my face, the fresh mud on my boots. "You've met him," he said finally. It wasn't a question. I saw him, I corrected, my voice flat. In the woods, by the crossroads. A slow, genuine smile spread across Crow S' face. It was the most terrifying expression I had ever seen on him. It was pride. And you understand now. The chain is unbroken. The work continues. The sparrow, I whispered. Why? To show you the purity of the form, he explained, his voice a low, pedagogical murmur. To show you that the vessel matters less than the emptiness it contains. A child, a girl, a bird, the act is the same. The creation of potential. A space for the wind to fill. I looked down at my hands, resting on the cold metal table. They were no longer the steady hands of a cop. They were the trembling hands of an acolyte. "What do you want from me?" "I want nothing," he said. tradition wants something. It wants a chronicler, a witness who sees the beauty in the silence that follows the scream. You tried to stop it, and in doing so, you were brought closer to its heart than any of us ever were. That is your purpose, to see it, to know it, to carry the truth of it. He leaned forward, the chains clinking softly. They will give you more cases, Greta. They will see the look in your eyes and mistake it for dedication. They will send you to the edges of things, to the dark places where the veil is thin. And you will go. You will stand at the crossroads, and you will find the empty baskets, the quiet places, the little absences. And you will not fill them. You will simply note them. You will add them to the collection. I stood up. The chair legs screeched against the floor. I had no more questions. He had given me my final assignment. It was not a job. It was a vocation. I walked out of the prison, through the gates, and into the world. The sky was a flat, featureless gray. I drove to the station, but I didn't go to the evidence room. I went to Benny's office. He was on the phone, but he hung up when he saw me in the doorway. Greta, what is it? I need to be on the missing persons desk, I said. The words felt foreign, yet inevitable. Full time. I want every report that comes in from the rural counties. Every strange disappearance. Every odd detail that doesn't fit. Benny studied my face, his own a mask of confusion and concern. Are you sure? After everything, that S a heavy load. I am sure, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. It S where I am needed. He nodded slowly, reluctantly. Okay, if that S what you want. It wasn't what I wanted. It was what was required. I turned and left his office, walking to the bullpen where my new, temporary desk was waiting. The first file was already there. A farmer reported a section of his cornfield had been cut down in a perfect circle. In the center of the circle, a single dead crow was pinned to the earth with a sharpened stick of elder wood. I opened the file. I did not feel dread. I did not feel anger. I felt a cold, scholarly curiosity. I took out a pen and began to write, noting the details, the location, the symbolism. The hollowing of the world was a text, and I was learning to read it. The wind had finally found its scribe. The elder wood was significant. It was a detail Crow had never used, nor had Leonard Voss. This was new language, a new dialect in the silent speech of the hollow things. I spent the rest of the day cross-referencing local folklore, finding old tales of elder trees as gates to the otherworld, as protectors and as accusers. The farmer's statement was blunt and confused. He kept saying the circle was too perfect, that no machine could have made it. I drove out to the farm as the sun bled out behind the hills. The field was vast, a sea of dry, whispering cornstalks. And there it was, a perfect, bald patch of earth about 20 feet in diameter. The soil was dark and turned, as if by a frantic hand. In the exact center, the crow was a dark smudge against the dirt. The pale elder would stake a stark line through its body. It wasn't a display of cruelty. It was a ritual, a punctuation mark, I didn't call it in. I didn't bag the evidence. I simply walked the perimeter of the circle, my boots sinking into the soft soil. The air within the circle was still and cold, separate from the breeze that rustled the surrounding corn. I closed my eyes and listened. There was no wind here to speak. There was only a profound and focused silence, a void that pressed against my eardrums. This was not a place where something had been taken. It was a place where something had been established, a sacred space for nothing. When I opened my eyes, I saw it. Tucked at the base of a cornstalk, just outside the circle, almost invisible, was another piece of candy. Not a peppermint this time. It was a butterscotch, the kind in the golden wrapper that crinkles just so. A progression, a refinement of the calling card. He was showing me his journey, his education. He was moving from the simple to the complex, from the random to the deliberate. He was developing a palate, just as Crow had said. And he was leaving these notes for me, his chosen audience. I picked up the butterscotch. The wrapper crackled in the silent air, a tiny, shocking sound. I put it in my pocket, not as evidence, but as a relic, a piece of the story. I knew then that I could not, report this. To do so would be to profane the ritual. It would be like shouting in a library. My duty was no longer to the law, but to the awful, unfolding truth. Back at my apartment, I placed the butterscotch next to the gourd. The two objects seemed to converse in their silence, one a promise, the other a conclusion. I opened my personal laptop, a machine untouched by departmental firewalls, and began a new document. I didn't title it. I just started typing. I described the circle, the crow, the elder wood, the candy. I wrote down my interpretations, my fears, my cold revelations. I was building a new kind of case file, one that would never see a courtroom. It was a grimoire of absence, a Bible of the hollow. The phone rang. It was Benny. Another one, Greta, just came over the wire. A state park ranger found a circle of stones in a remote part of the forest. In the center, a dead fox. No marks, just empty. It felt weird, so he called it in. It's in your neck of the woods now. I'll take it, I said, my voice steady. My heart a still, cold stone in my chest. Greta, Benny's voice, was heavy, with a concern he could no longer articulate. What are you finding out there? I looked at the gourd, at the butterscotch, at the glowing screen of my computer. I'm finding the pattern, Benny, I said softly. That's all, just the pattern. I hung up and went to the window. The wind was picking up again, whistling through a crack in the frame. It didn't whisper a word this time. It was singing a low, resonant note, a single, sustained tone that seemed to vibrate through the very bones of the building. It was the sound of the world being tuned to a new, terrible frequency, and I was the only one who could hear it. The next morning, the state park was a cathedral of fog and dripping pines. The ranger, a young man with a nervous jaw, led me to the stone circle. It was smaller than the one in the cornfield, the rocks mossy and ancient, as if they had been waiting centuries for this purpose. The fox lay in the center, a brush of vibrant red against the gray-green moss. It was beautiful and perfectly still, a small king in a ring of silent stones. There were no stakes, no candy, just the elegant finality of the arrangement. The ranger shuffled his feet. Weird, right? Like some kid's prank. It's not a prank, I said, my voice echoing flatly in the muffled air. I dismissed him, telling him I'd handle the scene. Once his footsteps faded, I knelt. The silence here was different from the cornfields. It was older, more patient. I reached out, not to touch the fox, but to feel the air above it. It was colder, a pocket of winter in the autumn chill. This was a different lesson. This was about history, about using what the land already provided. The artist was learning his canvas. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a vulgar intrusion. A text from an unknown number. My blood went cold, not with fear, but with a dreadful anticipation. There was no message, just a single image, a close-up photograph of a dead moth, its wings an intricate tapestry of gray and black, pinned to a piece of weathered corkboard. The detail was exquisite. I recognized the species, a black witch, a harbinger in some cultures, a simple pest in others. Its meaning was whatever he assigned to it. This was his gallery, and he was sending me the catalog. He had my number. He had been in my life, close enough to plant the gourd, to watch me. The violation was absolute, and yet it felt like a form of communion. I didn't block the number. I saved the contact. I didn't name it. I left it blank, a void in my address book to match the one growing inside me. Weeks bled into a month. The reports became my liturgy. A circle of melted snow in a high meadow, a dead hare at its center, a ring of floating debris in a stagnant pond, a single bloated fish amidst the twigs and leaves. Each was a verse in his ongoing sermon. I visited them all, my unofficial pilgrimage. I took my own photographs, wrote my own detailed notes, and added them to the document on my laptop. It was growing into a substantial, terrifying thesis. I stopped going to the prison. Crow had given me all the tools I needed. Our relationship was complete. My dialogue was now with the artist in the woods, the one who left me silent, beautiful horrors and cryptic images on my phone. The final break from my old life came on a Tuesday. Benny called me into his office and closed the door. His face was grave. The FBI is taking over the Voss case and all related incidents. They're calling it a potential serial. They want all our files, everything. I felt a strange calm. Okay. They want to talk to you, Greta. They've seen your request for all the weird stuff. They think you might have gone too deep. Have I asked, my gaze level. Benny looked away, unable to hold it. I don't know what you are anymore, Greta. I really don't. That afternoon, I cleaned out my desk. I didn't turn in my badge or my gun. I just left them in the top drawer. It felt like shedding a skin that had already molted. As I walked out of the station for the last time, a young, serious-faced man in a cheap suit was walking in, a federal badge clipped to his belt. Our eyes met for a second in the doorway. He saw a resigned, perhaps unstable, former officer. I saw a man who would spend years chasing shadows, never understanding that the darkness wasn't the enemy, it was the medium. I drove home. The apartment was empty now, the gourd and the butterscotch the only furnishings that mattered. I opened my laptop and opened the document. The blank cursor blinked at the end of my last entry. I knew what I had to do. I opened a new email. I typed in the blank contact his number. I attached the document. I didn't write a subject line or a message. I just clicked send. It was my contribution, my offering. The chronicler sending her work back to the artist. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. Another image. This one was of a single, fresh, purple wildflower growing from a crack in a sun-bleached skull of a deer. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever sent me. It was a thank you. The collaboration was now complete. The wind outside had finally stopped, and in the perfect, endless silence, I began to wait. The waiting was not passive. It was an active state of being, a tuning of the self to the new frequency. I left the apartment and moved into a small, isolated cabin at the edge of the state forest, a place I had inherited from an uncle and never used. It was closer to the work. The gourd and the butterscotch came with me, placed on the rough-hewn mantelpiece. The document on my laptop continued to grow, but now it contained more than just descriptions. It contained predictions, theories on the symbolism of certain trees, the alignment of stones, the migratory patterns of birds. I was no longer just a chronicler. I was a scholar of the void. He never showed himself again, not in a way that could be seen. But his presence was a constant pressure, like the change in air before a storm. The images on my phone became less frequent, but more profound. A photograph of a frozen waterfall, each icicle holding a trapped, perfectly preserved leaf at its core. A picture of an abandoned well, so dark it seemed to swallow the light around it. These were no longer just reports of his art. They were invitations to see the world through his eyes, to find the potential for hollowing in everything. I started taking my own walks, no longer just responding to reports, but seeking out places that felt ripe, that hummed with a latent silence. I found a grove of aspens where all the leaves had fallen in a perfect circle around the trunk. I found a badger set that had been meticulously excavated, the tunnels empty and clean, as if the earth had been scoured of life. I did not disturb these places. I simply documented them, unsure if they were his work, or merely places where the world was thinning on its own, and he was just the first to notice. One evening, as I sat on the cabin's porch watching the twilight bleed into night, my phone buzzed. It was not a picture. It was a single word, the first and only text he ever sent. Soon, the word hung in the air, devoid of threat, full of promise. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. It was the chill of a journey nearing its end. I looked out at the forest, a vast, dark shape against the deepening sky. I knew what was coming. The small lessons were over. The sparrow, the crow, the fox, they were preparatory sketches. The final piece was approaching, and my role was to be the final witness. I went inside and closed the laptop. I added no new entry. There was nothing more to write until the act was complete. I sat in the dark cabin, the only light coming from the faint, moon-like glow of the gourd. The sorrowful face was now entirely serene, its carved features holding a knowledge that was beyond human understanding. I waited, my hands resting on my knees, my breathing slow and even. I was ready. The line had not just disappeared, it had never existed. I was the silence after the sound, the empty space in the vessel, the keeper of the quiet, terrible truth. And I was waiting for my masterpiece. The knock on the cabin door, when it came, was not loud. It was a soft, deliberate tap, the sound of knuckle on wood, respectful and certain. I did not startle. I had been waiting. I rose and opened the door. A man stood there. He was not what I had expected, and yet he was exactly what I should have imagined. He was of average height and build, dressed in simple, dark, functional clothing. His face was unremarkable, the kind you would forget moments after seeing it. But his eyes were different. They were the same flat, calm gray as Darren Crow-S, but they held a deeper stillness, a more profound emptiness. He was not filled with fanaticism or pride. He was simply a conduit. He did not speak. He simply looked at me, and then past me into the cabin. His gaze lingered on the gourd and the butterscotch on the mantel. A faint, almost imperceptible nod. Then he held out his hand. In his palm lay a small, smooth river stone, dark and wet, as if just pulled from a stream. I understood. This was the invitation, not to watch, but to consecrate. I took the stone. It was cold and heavy for its size. I stepped out onto the porch, closing the cabin door behind me. I did not lock it. The concept of locks felt absurd now. He turned and began to walk into the woods, and I followed without a word. We walked for a long time, moving off the trails and into the deep, untouched parts of the forest. The moon was high, casting a silver light that turned the world into a monochrome print. He moved with an unnatural silence, his feet making no sound on the carpet of pine needles. I tried to mimic his grace, my own footsteps sounding clumsy and loud in comparison. We arrived at a small, natural clearing. In the center stood a single, ancient oak tree, its branches skeletal against the night sky. The ground around it was bare, a circle of hard-packed earth. This was the place. I could feel it. The air was so still it felt solid. The silence, a physical weight. He stopped at the edge of the clearing and turned to me. He gestured toward the center, toward the base of the great oak. My role was clear. I walked forward, the stone cold in my hand. I knelt at the base of the tree. There was a small, natural depression in the soil there, a perfect cup. I placed the river stone inside it. It was not an act of creation, but of completion. I was acknowledging what was already there, the inherent emptiness of the space. I stood and stepped back, rejoining him at the tree line. We stood side by side, two witnesses to the same truth. He did not look at me. His gaze was fixed on the clearing, on the stone, on the tree. He was utterly still, a statue in the moonlight. Then he began to hum. It was a low, single note, the same note I had heard the wind sing outside my apartment window. It was the sound of the void-given voice. The sound did not seem to come from his throat, but from the air around him, from the earth beneath our feet. It vibrated through me, resonating in my bones, emptying my mind of every last thought, every last memory of who I had been. The humming stopped. In the absolute silence that followed, the world seemed to hold its breath. The edges of the clearing appeared to waver, as if seen through heat haze. The darkness beneath the oak tree deepened, becoming more than an absence of light. It became a presence. It was the harvested silence, given form. It was the end of the chain, the final, perfect hollowing. And then it was over. The clearing was just a clearing again. The oak was just a tree. The man beside me let out a soft, slow breath. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows between the pines without a backward glance. I was alone. I looked at the stone, now just a stone in the dirt. I felt no triumph, no horror, no peace. I felt only a profound and total alignment. I was not a hunter. I was not a cop. I was not even a chronicler anymore. I was the silence after the hum. I was the empty space that remained. I turned and walked back toward the cabin, not as a person returning home, but as a concept returning to its source. The work was done. The truth was served. And I was finally, completely, full of nothing. The path back to the cabin was different. The trees were the same trees, the moon the same moon, but they were now arrangements of form and shadow, devoid of the stories we assigned to them. I felt no connection to them, and needed none. The cabin door was still unlocked. Inside, the air was still. The gourd on the mantel was just a dried vegetable. The butterscotch was a piece of candy. They held no meaning because meaning itself had been hollowed out. I sat in the chair by the cold fireplace and looked at my hands. They were tools that had served their purpose. The laptop on the table was a dead thing. Its stored words, now meaningless scratches. I did not open it. The document was complete because the experience it pointed toward was over. Language had been a bridge, and I had crossed it. Days passed, or perhaps they did not. Time had become a shallow concept, like a creek that has run dry. I ate when I was hungry, slept when I was tired, but these were mechanical processes. The frantic searching, the dreadful anticipation, the scholarly obsession, all of it was gone. I was not waiting for another image, another circle, another sign. The final sign had been my own transformation. I thought of Benny, of the FBI agent in the cheap suit. They were still out there somewhere, chasing a ghost. They would look for a man, for a pattern, for a motive. They would never find the truth, because the truth was not a thing to be found, but an absence to be realized. They were deaf to the frequency. One afternoon, I walked into town. The sunlight was sharp and carried no warmth. The sounds of cars and conversations were like noises from a distant room. I went to the post office and bought a single stamp. I had one letter to send. It was addressed to the warden of the prison that held Darren Crow. Inside was a blank sheet of paper. Nothing else. It was the only reply he deserved, the only thing he would understand. I dropped it in the mailbox, the metal slot closing with a definitive clang. On the walk back, I passed a child flying a kite. The string was taut, a vibrant yellow line against the blue sky. The child laughed as the kite dipped and soared. I watched, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of something not nostalgia, not longing, but a recognition of the pattern. The string was a tether, a connection between earth and sky, between the solid and the fleeting. Then the string snapped. The kite, suddenly free, whipped away on the wind. A diamond-shaped piece of paper tumbling into the vast, indifferent blue. The child stood, stunned, the broken string dangling from a small hand. I continued walking. I did not look back. The cabin was ahead, a quiet space in a quiet world. There were no more circles to find, no more messages to receive. My work was done. The hollowing was complete, and I was, at last, a perfect vessel. Story 2. The first thing Jeremy noticed, in the long twilight of the Arctic October, was a new rhythm inside his chest. It was not his heartbeat, that familiar, dependable drum. This was something else, a faint, fibrillating pulse that ran just beneath the skin of his sternum. A tiny, disobedient vibration that seemed to answer to a different metronome. He felt it as he sat in the mess tent, a tin cup of cooling coffee in his hand, listening to the wind, a constant, grieving sound against the reinforced nylon walls. It was a subtle thing, easy to dismiss as a muscle twitch, or a trick of the profound silence that pressed in from all sides. But he knew it was neither. It was a guest, an uninvited tenant, and it had taken up residence in the dark, warm space behind his ribs. Outside, the world was a study in monochrome. The sun had surrendered for the season, leaving behind a perpetual bruised twilight that clung to the horizon for a few scant hours each day. The rest was an endless, star-dusted night, a black velvet pincushion. Their camp, a cluster of brightly colored domes huddled on the ice, was the only speck of color for hundreds of miles. It was a pocket of desperate life in a landscape of absolute death. The air was so cold it felt solid, a crystal clarity that shattered in the lungs. Every sound, the crunch of a boot on snow, the hiss of the stove, the low murmur of a voice, was sharp and isolated, a tiny defiance against the immense, listening quiet. His fellow explorers were withdrawing, their personalities folding in on themselves like flowers at nightfall. Dr. Aris Thorne, the expedition lead glaciologist, spent his days staring at core samples, as if reading a tragic history in the trapped air bubbles. He had stopped making eye contact, his conversations reduced to technical mutterings. Lena Petrova, the structural engineer, had become a creature of routine, checking and rechecking the guy wires on the tents, her movements sharp and bird-like. She jumped at the creak of the ice, her eyes wide and dark, constantly scanning the void beyond their floodlights. They were all fraying, worn thin by the isolation and the oppressive darkness. It was an eternal Halloween here, Jeremy thought one evening, a night that never ended, a season of death made permanent. The orange glow of their heaters against the tent walls was their jack-o'-lantern light, a feeble mockery of the autumnal fires and festive gourds of a world that felt like a distant dream. It was Lena who first mentioned the feeling of being watched. "It's not a person," she said, her voice low over a dinner of rehydrated stew. "A person has a shape. A person breathes. This is a direction, a point in the darkness from which the silence feels older." Thorne had scoffed, a dry, papery sound. Isolation psychosis. It's well documented. The mind populates the void. It's why ancient sailors saw mermaids. We're just seeing whatever our particular brand of dread conjures up. But Jeremy's dog, Kodiak, a hulking Malamute mix with eyes the color of old amber, did not suffer from psychosis. He had begun to growl, a low, continuous rumble deep in his throat. His massive head turned always toward the same featureless stretch of ice to the north. He would stand for hours at the edge of the light, the fur on his spine ridged, his body rigid, staring into the blackness as if watching a performance only he could see. Sometimes he would whimper, a soft, lost sound, and press his cold, wet nose into Jeremy's palm. The new pulse in Jeremy's chest would quicken then, thrumming in sympathetic vibration with the dog's anxiety. It was a signal, a confirmation. He began his record, not in the official expedition log, but in a private, leather-bound journal. He wrote by the weak, orange glow of a battery-powered lamp, the pages smelling of cold and ink. October 27th. The darkness is no longer empty. It has a texture. When the wind drops to a whisper, you can feel it a pressure, like a hand placed gently but firmly against the outside of the tent. Kodiak will not settle. Thorne claims the seismic sensors are picking up nothing but the natural shifting of the ice sheet. I do not believe him. Or perhaps I do not believe the sensors. Some things are not meant to be measured by machines. The Halloween atmosphere of the world they left behind began to haunt him in unexpected ways. He dreamed not of ice, but of the suburban streets of his childhood, of the crisp October air smelling of wood smoke and decay. He saw the grinning, candle-lit faces of jack-o'-lanterns on every porch, their light flickering not with fire, but with the same cold, orange glow of their camp heaters. In the dream, he was trick-or-treating, his feet crunching through not snow, but a carpet of crimson and amber leaves. He would approach a door, his bag held out, and the person who answered would be featureless, a mere silhouette against a warm, homey light. They would drop a single piece of coal into his bag. He'd look down, and in the bag, the coal would be pulsing with a faint, red light, in time with the vibration in his chest. He woke from these dreams gasping, the taste of candy corn and cold copper in his mouth. The line between the Arctic night and the Halloween of his memory was blurring. The holiday's ancient purpose a night when the veil thinned felt terrifyingly literal here at the top of the world. They were in the ultimate liminal space, a threshold between known and unknown, and something was using the door. October 29th. The presence is no longer content to watch. Last night I saw it, or rather I saw its effect. I was on watch, the thermometer reading 40 below. The aurora was out, a ghostly green curtain shimmering in the sky. And then, in the middle of that vast, empty plain of ice, a figure. It was tall, impossibly so, and thin, a mere suggestion of a shape made of shifting shadows and refracted starlight. It did not walk. It unspooled. It moved with a languid, boneless grace, and where it passed, the ice did not crack, but sighed, emitting a faint, phosphorescent glow, a cold light that died as quickly as it was born. It was the color of a rotten pumpkin's inner flesh, a sickly, luminous orange-green. It carried with it the smell of ozone and of something profoundly old, like the air from a sealed tomb. Kodiak, tethered by my side, did not growl. He fell silent, a silence more terrible than any sound, and crouched, pressing his belly to the ice in absolute submission. He did not tell the others what he had seen. Words would have cheapened it, reduced it to a ghost story. This was no ghost. It was something else, something that belonged to the ice and the darkness, a natural feature of this desolate place, as a tree was to a forest. A carnivorous tree. The following day, Thorn disappeared. It was Petrova who found the evidence. A single set of footprints led away from camp, toward the north. They were deep, purposeful. They ended abruptly, not at a crevasse or any other feature, but simply stopped, as if he had been plucked from the ice. A few yards from the last print, lying on the pristine snow, was one of Thorn's core samples. It had been split open, and inside the ancient ice, perfectly preserved, was not a bubble of air, but a single, perfectly formed black spider, its legs curled tight as if in sleep. It was a thing that could not be, a fossilized impossibility. When Jeremy picked it up, the ice melted in the heat of his glove, and the spider, after millennia of frozen slumber, uncurled one delicate, jointed leg. That was when the voice began. It did not come from outside. It came from the vibration in his chest. It was a dry, rustling sound, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "You are the recorder," it whispered, the sound resonating in the hollow of his bones. "You are the witness. This is the true harvest. This is the reaping of the lonely places." It was Halloween night. He knew this with a certainty that defied the meaningless passage of time down here. Somewhere, children were laughing behind plastic masks, their bags growing heavy with candy. Somewhere, doors were opening and closing, and the friendly, fearful game of trick-or-treat was playing out under an enormous, orange harvest moon. Here, there was only the endless night and the thing that shared it with them, Petrova finally broke. She started screaming about shapes in the fog, about faces in the ice. She said the thing was wearing thorn-esque skin, that it was walking toward the camp, moving with thorn-esque gait, but with the boneless grace of the shadow figure. She ran out into the darkness, her screams swallowed almost instantly by the hungry silence. Jeremy did not follow. He knew it was too late. The offering had been accepted. He sat in the mess tent, Kodiak lying at his feet, trembling. The pulse in his chest was strong now, a steady, commanding rhythm. It was no longer a guest. It was the host. He was the vessel. The voice rustled inside him again. The mask must be carved. The light must be lit. You have prepared the vessel. Now we will wear it. He understood. The Arctic was the ultimate Halloween landscape. The endless night was the thinned veil. Their isolation was the ritual. They had not come here to study the ice. They had come here as an invitation. Thorn and Petrova had been the first tributes. He was to be the final one, the one who would carry the message, the one who would wear the costume of the thing that lived in the long dark. He did not fight it. There was no point. This was a force as old as the ice, as inevitable as the turning of the season toward death. He felt his body rise, moving not by his own will, but by the will of the pulse. He walked out of the tent. Kodiak followed, not with a growl, but with a quiet, resigned whine. Outside, the world had changed. The ice glowed with that same sickly, phosphorescent light he had seen before. The aurora was a violent, swirling riot of green and purple, and in its patterns, he could see vast, incomprehensible shapes moving. And standing at the edge of the camp was the figure. It was closer now. He could see that it was not a single form, but a composite of shifting, fragmenting shapes, like a man seen through fractured ice. It held out a hand that was not a hand, a tendril of darkness and cold light. Jeremy walked toward it. The cold no longer bit at him. He was part of the cold now. As he reached the entity, he felt a final, profound shift within. The pulse in his chest expanded, flooding him, and his own consciousness was pushed into a small, quiet corner of his mind. He was a passenger in his own skin, the thing that was Jeremy, and was also something infinitely older, turned and looked back at the camp. It saw the orange glow of the heater through the tent wall, a lone, flickering jack-o'-lantern in the immense blackness. It was a perfect, tiny detail in the vast, uncaring cosmos. A candle in the dark. A signal. Kodiak lay down in the snow, his head on his paws, his eyes fixed on the form of his master. He did not move. He only watched, and the thing wearing Jeremy's face remained still, observing the inexplicable detail of the loyal animal's silent vigil. A moment of pure, uncomprehending love in the midst of the cosmic horror, silently accepting it as part of the new, terrible order of the world. The harvest was complete. The night was theirs. The silence that followed was not the empty silence of before. It was a held breath, a watchful quiet. The thing that had been Jeremy stood for a long time, feeling the new currents of the world through its stolen senses. The wind carried different information now, whispers of pressure systems, and the slow, grinding poetry of the ice. It could feel the immense weight of the sky, a burden it was now perfectly designed to bear. It looked down at its hands, flexing the fingers. The flesh was cold, a suitable housing. The memory of the man, Jeremy, was a faint, fading echo, a pocket of warmth in a vast, cold structure. The dog, Kodiak, was a part of that pocket. The entity observed the animal's unwavering gaze, the simple, biological imperative of loyalty. It was a paradox, a knot of sentiment in the clean, logical fabric of its purpose. It did not untie the knot. It simply noted its existence. A new impulse, a directive from the deep, cold pulse at its core, sent it moving. It walked past the trembling dog, past the tents that now seemed like discarded husks. It went to the communications shed, a small dome filled with humming electronics and blinking lights. With a casual, precise motion, it tore the main transmitter from its housing, the wires snapping like frozen tendons. There would be no distress call, no final, puzzling message for the world to find. The mystery would remain intact. Another vanishment in the white, a cautionary tale for future interlopers. Next, it went to Thorn's tent. The glaciologist's notes were scattered across a folding table, covered in frantic, spidery handwriting from his final days. The entity gathered every page, every map, every core sample log. It did not read them. It absorbed their potential, the danger they represented, as a record of what should not be recorded. It carried them outside, piled them in the center of the camp, and placed Jeremy's leather-bound journal on top. From Jeremy's pocket, it produced a simple lighter. The flame that sputtered to life was a tiny, impertinent thing, a spark from the world of warmth. It touched the flame to the paper. The fire that bloomed was not the cheerful blaze of a hearth, but a cold, greedy conflagration that consumed the words, the data, the final thoughts of two scientists, turning them into black ash that was swiftly scattered by the wind. The entity stood by the pyre until the last ember died. Then it turned its attention north. Kodiak finally stirred. He rose to his feet, his body low to the ground, and let out a single, soft whine. It was not a sound of fear, but of pleading. The thing that wore Jeremy's face looked at the dog. A flicker of the old self, a ghost of a memory, passed through the cold architecture of its mind. A memory of warmth, of a hand on fur, of shared solitude. It was an illogical, inefficient impulse, but the entity was a collector of thresholds, and this loyalty was a threshold of a kind, a door between one state of being and another. It did not speak. It simply turned and began to walk, its movements fluid and unnaturally steady on the treacherous ice. It did not look back. For a long moment, Kodiak remained, torn between the empty, familiar scent of the camp and the retreating, alien scent of his master. Then, with a heartbroken resolve, the dog followed, his paws making soft, crunching sounds in the snow. trailing the single, unwavering set of footprints that led away from the world of light and into the waiting, permanent dark. The harvest was complete, but the winter, it seemed, required a witness. The line between them stretched, a taut, invisible thread of devotion. The entity was aware of the dog's presence, as it was aware of the slow creep of glaciers or the dance of magnetic fields. It was a datum, neither welcomed nor rejected. They traveled for a time that had no measure through a landscape that began to subtly change. The ice underfoot lost its gritty texture, becoming smoother, almost glassy. The sickly phosphorescence Jeremy had witnessed earlier now rose from the ground itself. A faint, internal luminescence that made the stars overhead seem dim and distant. The air grew still, the constant wind dying away into an unnerving calm. The silence here was different from the silence of the camp. This was a profound, absorbing quiet, a silence that drank sound. Kodiak's panting, the crunch of his paws, even the rustle of the entity's borrowed parka, all were muted, as if they were walking through a world packed with cotton wool. A shape began to form ahead, a darker mass against the endless night. As they drew closer, it resolved into a structure of ice. It was not a natural formation. It had symmetry, intention. It was an archway, vast and crude, carved from the heart of an iceberg. Its surfaces were not smooth, but etched with spirals and angles that hurt the eye to follow, patterns that spoke of mathematics and madness. Through the arch, the darkness was not mere absence of light, but a substantive void, a blackness that seemed to swirl with slow, invisible currents. This was the source. The entity felt the pulse in its chest quicken, not with anxiety, but with a sense of homecoming. It was a key approaching its lock. Kodiak stopped a dozen yards from the arch, his instincts screaming a final, desperate warning. He planted his feet, a low growl building in his throat, the first sound that had carried its full weight in hours. The entity paused at the threshold and turned. It looked at the dog, not with the fondness of Jeremy, but with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a persistent anomaly. The loyalty was a stronger thread than it had calculated. The voice, the rustle of dead leaves, did not come from the chest this time. It seemed to emanate from the arch itself, from the swirling darkness beyond it. The thread remains, a tether to the sunlit world. It must be severed. The entity understood. The dog was the last anchor holding the ghost of Jeremy to this body, to this reality. To fully cross, the anchor had to be cut. It took a step back toward Kodiak. The dog, seeing his master approach, whined again, his tail giving a single, hesitant wag. The conflict in his animal heart was a painful, visible thing. The entity reached out a hand, not in a gesture of affection, but of acquisition. It was not going to pet the dog. It was going to still him, to absorb that final, warm spark of resistance into its own cold totality. But as the cold fingers neared the thick fur of the dog's head, a memory, sharp and vivid, flared in the occupied mind. It was not the entity S memory. It was Jeremy S., a memory of a small boy, scared of the dark on Halloween night, holding onto the family dog for comfort. The memory was saturated with a feeling, a simple, powerful emotion that the entity had no name for. It was warmth. It was safety. It was love. The entity S hand stopped, hovering an inch from Kodiak S head. For a single, timeless moment, the cold, cosmic will and the ghost of the man warred within the single, stolen form. The pulse hammered, a drum commanding the final step. The memory held, a shield of sentimental, illogical light. The entity made its choice. Its hand did not touch the dog. Instead, it lowered. It turned away from Kodiak and faced the arch. The thread would not be severed. It would be stretched, tested, perhaps eventually broken by time and the harsh reality of this place. But it would not be cut by its hand. Without a backward glance, the thing that was Jeremy stepped through the arch of ice. The effect was instantaneous. The muted world vanished. The phosphorescent ice, the star-dusted sky, the loyal dog, all were gone, replaced by the swirling, substantive blackness. The entity felt its borrowed form begin to dissolve, not into nothingness, but into something vaster, its individual consciousness merging with the ancient, collective presence that had called it home. The last human sensation to fade was not the cold or the vibration, but the lingering, impossible warmth of that final, defiant memory. Inside the arch, Kodiak saw his master vanish. He let out a long, mournful howl that was swallowed by the hungry silence. He waited, as dogs do, for a return that would never come. The arch stood silent, a monument to a threshold crossed, its etched patterns glowing faintly in the perpetual night, a grave marker in a cemetery of ice. The witness remained, alone with his vigil, guarding the empty doorway between worlds. The days that followed were measured only by the slow dimming of the dog's own spirit. He kept his post before the arch, a sentinel with no one left to guard. He slept fitfully, his dreams full of sense he could no longer find in the waking world. He would nose at the air, catching a phantom trace of his master, only to find it was the sterile, ancient cold of the archway. He grew thin, his ribs beginning to show beneath his thick coat. The world had become a monochrome of white and black, the arch a stark, silent gateway he dared not approach. One morning, or what passed for morning in the endless twilight, a change occurred. The faint, internal glow of the ice around the arch began to pulse, a slow, rhythmic throb that matched the memory of the vibration in Jeremy's chest. Kodiak lifted his head, a low whine escaping his throat. The silence was no longer empty. It was charged, waiting. From the swirling darkness within the arch, a figure emerged. It was Jeremy. Or rather, it was the shape of him, carved from the same sickly, phosphorescent light that suffused the ice. It was a sketch of a man, a memory given form, but the eyes were voids of absolute blackness. It moved with the same unspooling grace Jeremy had witnessed in the original entity. Kodiak scrambled back, a bark caught in his throat, a mixture of hope and primal terror. The figure stopped and looked at him. It did not speak, but a thought, dry and rustling, implanted itself directly into the dog's consciousness. The thread remains. The figure raised a hand of cold light. It was not a gesture of menace, but of offering. In its palm rested a single piece of coal, pulsing with a deep, red glow. The same coal from Jeremy's dreams. The witness must become the recorder. Carry the light. Carry the truth of this place. The thought was not a request. It was a command, woven into the fabric of the air itself. Kodiak, driven by an instinct deeper than loyalty or fear, crept forward. He nudged the glowing coal with his nose. It was not hot, but cold, a shard of absolute zero that burned with a paradoxical energy. As he touched it, a jolt passed through him, a silent understanding. He was to be the new vessel, not for the entity, but for the story. He was to be the living grave marker. He took the coal into his mouth. The cold did not hurt him. It felt like a secret, a heavy, dark truth resting on his tongue. The phosphorescent figure of Jeremy nodded once, a slow, deliberate motion, and then it dissolved, its light flowing back into the archway, which fell dormant once more. Kodiak turned. He knew what he had to do. He began the long walk back, following the fading trail they had made. The journey was different now. The silence was a companion, not an enemy. The strange, glowing ice lit his path. He did not stop at the abandoned camp. He moved past the scorched circle where the records had been burned, past the empty tents that flapped like ghosts in a wind that had returned. He had a single purpose. Weeks later, a rescue team, acting on the prolonged silence, would find the camp. They would find the evidence of a sudden, unexplained abandonment. They would find the shredded communications equipment and the journal, its pages blank and brittle. All the ink seemingly evaporated from the paper. Their search for the crew would yield nothing. But on the very edge of the camp, half buried in a drift, one of the searchers would find a dog, a magnificent Malamute, lying still and silent. He was alive, but just barely, his eyes open and fixed on the northern horizon. He would not respond to food or water. He would not move. Puzzled and moved by the animal's tragic vigil, they would gently lift him onto their helicopter to bring him back to the world. As the helicopter rose, one of the rescuers, trying to offer comfort, would pry open the dog's mouth to give him a piece of ice. He would freeze, then recoil. Inside, resting on the dog's tongue, was a single black lump of coal. It was warm to the touch, and in the dim cabin light, it pulsed with a faint, rhythmic red glow. The helicopter's roar was a violation of the deep, quiet Kodiak had carried within him. The vibrations were wrong, a frantic, mechanical buzzing instead of the deep, patient hum of the ice. He kept the coal on his tongue, a secret and a burden. The rescuers spoke in hushed, concerned tones, their words meaningless sounds that washed over him. They saw a traumatized animal. They did not see the recorder, the keeper of the threshold. They took him to a facility in Troms, a place of white walls and bright lights and smells of antiseptic and strange humans. A veterinarian examined him, her hands gentle but alien. When she tried to look in his mouth, he resisted, a low, guttural growl rumbling in his chest that was so unlike his usual nature it startled even him. She noted his extreme malnourishment and dehydration, his deep-seated trauma, and the strange object she had glimpsed. She decided not to force the issue, prioritizing fluids and nutrition. Kodiak refused to eat. He refused to drink. He lay on the clean blanket in his kennel, his head on his paws, his eyes fixed on the wall, but seeing only the arch of ice. The coal was his only sustenance, a cold fire that sustained his body while it weighed down his spirit. The medical staff was baffled. They called him a mystery, a symbol of the unforgiving Arctic. Days turned into a week. A decision was made. He could not stay here. A handler was found, a quiet man named Eric, who had worked with sled dogs all his life. Eric did not try to force affection. He simply sat with Kodiak, speaking in a soft, steady voice, recognizing a profound and unnameable grief in the animal's eyes. He was the one tasked with taking Kodiak to a new home, a quiet cabin on the outskirts of a fjord, to live out whatever days he had left in peace. The car ride was another trial of noise and motion. Eric parked at the edge of a wood, deciding the walk to the cabin would be calmer. He opened the crate. Kodiak emerged slowly, his legs stiff. The air here was different. It was not the sterile, ancient cold of the north, but a damp, living chill, full of the scent of pine and salt water. It was wrong. It was a world that had no business holding the truth he carried. Eric began to walk toward the cabin. His back turned for a moment as he pointed out the path. It was the opportunity the command within the coal had been waiting for. Kodiak did not run. He turned and walked, not with the frantic energy of an escape, but with the same deliberate, resigned pace with which he had followed his master into the dark. He moved into the trees, the undergrowth swallowing him whole. Eric called his name, his voice fading behind him. Kodiak kept walking. He walked until the sounds of man were gone, replaced by the whisper of wind in the pines and the distant cry of a gull. He found a place where the trees thinned, overlooking the steel-gray water of the fjord. The short, northern day was already fading, the sun a smudge of orange on the horizon. He lay down, the cold earth a familiar bed. He opened his mouth and let the coal roll onto the moss in front of him. It pulsed, its red glow deepening in the twilight. The command was complete. The story had been carried from the absolute elsewhere to the edge of the world of men. It was planted now, a seed of absolute cold in the fertile soil of reality. A final exhaustion claimed him. His breathing slowed. As his eyes closed, he did not see the trees or the water. He saw the archway, and for a fleeting second, he saw Jeremy, not as the phosphorescent entity, but as the man smiling, a hand outstretched. The thread, stretched to its breaking point, finally snapped. In the morning, Eric would find him there, peaceful and still. He would mourn the dog he could not save. He would see the lump of coal, and shaking his head at the strange ways of animals, would leave it there, a odd grave marker, and the coal continued to pulse, a slow, patient rhythm, a tiny, captured piece of the endless night, waiting in the moss for a time when the veil would thin again, and its truth would be ready to be read. The seasons turned around the small patch of moss where Kodiak lay. Snow fell, blanketing his form and the strange, dark stone beside him. The spring thaw came, and green shoots pushed up through the wet earth, weaving around his still legs and brushing against the coal. It continued its silent, rhythmic pulse, a heartbeat for a plot of ground that held a story too large for any headstone. Eric, the handler, never forgot. He often returned to the spot, a quiet pilgrimage. He would clear away the heaviest of the undergrowth, his hands gentle. He noticed things. The moss directly around the coal seemed different, denser, with a faint, bluish tint. No insects ever crawled upon its surface. It was a place of profound stillness, a pocket of silence in the chattering woods. One evening, a year after Kodiak's death, Eric brought a friend, a geologist named Anya, who was fascinated by local minerals. He did not tell her the whole story, only that he had found a curious rock near where his dog had passed. He led her to the spot as the long Arctic twilight began to settle. Anya knelt, her professional curiosity piqued. She pulled out a small pick and her hand lens. She did not touch the coal with her bare hands. There was an aura about it, a feeling of intense cold that radiated from it despite the warmth of the day. She tapped it gently with the pick. It did not chip or crack. Instead, it emitted a low, subaudible hum that made the fillings in her teeth ache. "This is not coal," she whispered, her voice tight. She looked more closely through her lens. The surface was not porous like coal, but impossibly smooth, a perfect, featureless black sphere that seemed to absorb the fading light. The red glow was not a reflection. It pulsed from within, a slow, steady rhythm that felt less like a visual phenomenon and more like a signal. "Eric, where did this really come from?" Before he could answer, a shadow fell over them. A man stood at the edge of the clearing, a man they had not heard approach. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in a dark, heavy coat despite the season. His face was pale, his eyes a washed-out gray that held no light. In his hand, he carried a device of polished brass and whirring gears, which he pointed toward the coal. A needle on a dial swung violently into a red zone. "You should not be here," the man said. His voice was flat, devoid of inflection. "That does not belong to this world. Who are you?" Eric demanded, stepping forward, his body tensing. The man ignored him, his attention fixed on the pulsating sphere. He reached into his coat and produced a lead-lined box, its surface etched with symbols that swam in the twilight. The harvest was incomplete. A seed was planted, It must be uprooted before it germinates. Anya stood up, backing away. What is that thing? What do you mean, germinate? The man took a step toward the coal. The device in his hand began to emit a high-pitched whine. The pulse from the coal quickened, the red glow flaring brighter, casting long, dancing shadows through the trees. The air grew colder, and the familiar sounds of the forest, the birds, the wind seemed to pull away, sucked into the same absorbing silence that Kodiak had known. It is a memory, the man said, his dead eyes finally flicking to Eric. A memory of a place that should not be remembered. And memories, when cared for, have a tendency to grow. He knelt, the lead box open. As his fingers neared the sphere, the blue-tinged moss around it blackened and crumbled to dust. The story was not over. The witness was gone, but the record remained, and now a new chapter was beginning. Right there, in the quiet woods at the edge of the world, Eric moved without thinking, his instincts screaming. He shoved the gaunt man hard, sending him stumbling away from the coal. The lead box clattered to the ground, its lid snapping shut. The whining from the brass device ceased abruptly. "You will not touch it," Eric said, his voice low and shaking. He positioned himself between the man and Kodiak's final resting place. The man rose slowly, brushing moss from his coat. His expression was one of detached analysis, not anger. "You interfere with a necessary quarantine. You do not understand the contamination you are cultivating. I understand that this dog carried something back," Anya said, her voice trembling but firm. "And I understand that you want to take it and hide it. Who do you work for?" The man's gaze shifted to her. "Work for is an inaccurate term. We are a consequence, a corrective measure." His eyes returned to the pulsating coal. "That object is a focal point. It is a piece of a reality that is fundamentally incompatible with our own. Left alone, it will not simply lie here. It will propagate. It will rewrite the local laws of physics to suit its origin." "Propagate how?" Eric asked, his mind reeling. The man gestured to the dead, blackened circle of earth. "Like that. But it will not stop. It will spread, slowly at first, then faster. The silence you feel here will become permanent. The cold will become absolute. It will create a beachhead, a little piece of that place, growing in the heart of this one." Anya stared at the coal, her scientific mind grappling with the impossible. It's transmitting information. Not data, but reality itself. "Precisely," the man said. He took a step forward, but Eric held his ground. "You have a choice. You can let me contain it. Or you can stay and become the first citizens of the new, silent world it builds." Eric looked down at the peaceful form of the dog, then at the pulsing sphere. He thought of Jeremy, of the lost crew, of Kodiak's unwavering loyalty. This wasn't just contamination. It was a message, a terrible, dangerous message, but a message nonetheless. To destroy, it felt like committing a second murder. "No," Eric said. The gaunt man blinked, a slow, reptilian motion. "That is illogical. It is human, Eric replied. We were not giving it to you. A faint, almost imperceptible sigh escaped the man's lips. Very well. You have chosen to be part of the record. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkening trees as silently as he had arrived. The oppressive stillness lifted instantly, the normal night sounds of the forest returning in a rush. Eric and Anya stood alone, their hearts pounding, the weight of their decision settling upon them. What do we do now? Anya whispered. Eric looked at the coal, then at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. We watch, he said. We learn, and we guard it, from them and from anyone else who would come. He knelt, not by the coal, but by Kodiak. He placed a hand on the dog's thick fur, now matted with a year of weather. You brought it home, boy, he murmured. We'll take it from here. The coal pulsed on, a steady, rhythmic beacon in the growing dark. It was no longer a secret kept by a lone dog. It was a shared burden, a dangerous truth now guarded by two people at the edge of the world, the first keepers of a silence that was waiting to speak. They built a small, hidden shelter 100 yards from the clearing, using fallen wood and a sheet of camouflaged tarpaulin. It was not a home, but an observation post. Eric brought supplies from his cabin, his movements now furtive, his eyes constantly scanning the trees. Anya returned to Trom's, but only to gather her own equipment, electromagnetic sensors, a sensitive thermometer, a seismograph. She quit her job with a vague excuse about a family emergency. The gravity of what they were doing required full commitment. Their first discovery was that the man had not been lying. The zone of effect was expanding, but at an infinitesimally slow rate. By their most precise measurements, the circle of bluish, insect-free moss grew by less than a millimeter each day. The cold was more pronounced, a perpetual chill that made their breath plume even on relatively warm afternoons. The silence was the most unnerving factor. It was not an absence of sound, but a suppression. A bird that flew directly over the coal would, for a few wing beats, become utterly mute. They kept a log, a stark, factual record of the sphere's behavior. Its pulse was a perfect, unvarying rhythm, one beat every 12 hours, exactly at dawn and dusk. It was a clock keeping time for a different sun. Weeks passed. They saw no one. The gaunt man and his organization, if it was an organization, seemed to have withdrawn. Eric began to hope they had been a bluff. Anya knew better. They were being watched. She could feel it, a prickle on her neck when she went to check the sensors. The forest itself felt like it was holding its breath. One night, the pulse changed. It was not dawn or dusk, but the deep, dark hour of midnight. The coal's red glow intensified, shifting from a deep crimson to a harsh, actinic violet. The hum they had only been able to measure with equipment became audible, a low drone that vibrated in their bones. The thermometer needle plummeted. "It is happening," Anya said, her voice tight with with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She was watching through a pair of night vision goggles. The sphere is no longer just pulsing. It is projecting. Eric looked. Faint, shimmering lines of violet light were extending from the coal, sketching shapes in the air above it. They were jagged, non-Euclidean forms that hurt the eyes to follow. They were the same patterns Jeremy had seen in the ice, the same architecture of the archway. A ghost of the gateway was being drawn in light upon the Norwegian night. Then came the sound. It started as a whisper, a rustle of dry leaves, but it quickly resolved into something else, the sound of a page turning. Then another, and another. A cascade of pages, a phantom library being consulted in the air. It was the sound of the journal, its evaporated ink now speaking, its lost words given voice in a language of rustling paper and shifting light. A figure began to coalesce within the shimmering lines. It was not the phosphorescent Jeremy, nor the gaunt man. It was paler, more insubstantial, a thing of compressed silence and frozen thought. It had too many limbs, or not enough, its form refusing to be constant. It was one of the things from beyond the arch. It had found the signal. Eric grabbed the rifle he kept leaned against the shelter wall. Anya put a hand on his arm. "What will that do?" "I don't know," he said. "But I am not letting it step out of that light." The thing in the violet arch stretched a tendril of itself toward the moss of their world. Where it reached, the moss didn't blacken and die. It transformed. It became a hard, glassy surface, a tiny pane of the same glowing ice from the original site. The beachhead was beginning its construction. The gaunt man arrived then, not from the trees, but from the shadows cast by the violet light itself. He was not alone. Two others, identical in their pallor and their dead-eyed stare, emerged with him. They carried different devices, now long, rod-like instruments that glowed with a fierce, white energy. "The containment team," the lead man said, his flat voice cutting through the drone and the rustling. "You have forced an accelerated response." He pointed his rod at the coalescing entity. The white light lashed out, not as a beam, but as a net of incandescent threads. It wrapped around the shimmering form, which thrashed silently against the bonds. The violet arch flickered. The sound of turning pages became a screech of tearing paper. "You ray not destroying it," Anya shouted over the din. "You ray just trapping it. That is the function of a quarantine," the man replied, his focus absolute. "We do not have the means to destroy it, only to push it back and seal the point of entry." Eric watched, the rifle heavy in his hands, as the white net constricted. The entity was being compressed, forced back into the coal, which now pulsed erratically, flashing between violet and a sickly, desperate green. The gaunt man's companions aimed their rods at the coal itself. The air screamed. In that moment, Eric made a choice. He didn't raise the rifle at the men. He lowered it. He looked at Anya, and she gave a single, sharp nod. They were not on the side of the entity or the silence it brought. But they were not on the side of the erasers either, these men who would seal away a truth without understanding it. They were on the side of the story. As the white light prepared to slam shut a permanent seal around the coal, Eric lunged not for the men, but for Anya S. seismograph. He ripped the heavy battery from its housing, and with a grunt of effort, hurled it into the center of the clearing. It landed beside the coal with a heavy thud. The concentrated energy from the rods, already interacting with the Sphere S unstable field, interacted violently with the battery S crude electromagnetic signature. The world turned white, then black. The sound was not a bang, but an implosion of reality. Eric was thrown backward, his head striking a tree. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness took him was the violet arch shattering into a million fading shards, the entity dissolving into a shower of cold sparks, and the coal, now dark and dormant, rolling a few inches closer to Kodiak S' still form. The silence that returned was not the charged silence of the archway, but the simple, stunned quiet of a forest in shock. The first attempt at propagation had failed. The record, for now, was safe, but the keepers were down, and the watchers in the shadows were still there. He woke to a throbbing in his skull and the smell of damp earth. Anya was kneeling over him, her face pale in the weak morning light filtering through the pines. Her hands were pressed against a wad of cloth on his temple. "You ray alive," she said, her voice hushed. "I wasn't sure." Eric tried to sit up, a wave of nausea forcing him back down. The clearing. What happened? It has gone quiet. The coal is dark, no pulse. She helped him prop himself against the tree. Her eyes were wide, haunted. They ray gone too. The men. Eric looked toward the clearing. The circle of bluish moss was larger now, a perfect, silent disk. At its center, the coal lay like any other stone, inert and black. Kodiak rested beside it, untouched. The battery from the seismograph was a scorched and twisted ruin a few feet away. They didn't finish the job, Eric mumbled, his thoughts sluggish. They left it. I don't think they had a choice, Anya replied. That energy discharge, it was a feedback loop. It burned out their devices. I saw them stumble away. They looked damaged. A grim satisfaction settled in Eric S. gut. He struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on Anya. They stood together, looking at the dormant sphere. It was a victory, but a fragile one. They had beaten back the first wave, both of the invasion and the quarantine. But the war was clearly not over. We have to move it, Eric said. Anya shook her head. After that, we have no idea what would happen if we try to disturb it. It is stable now, dormant. Moving it might be like poking a bear. Then we hide it better, he insisted. They know where it is. The LL be back with different tools. They spent the day in a feverish, pained rush. Eric gathered stones from a nearby creek bed while Anya, using a fallen branch as a lever, carefully, so carefully, pried the coal from the indentation it had made in the moss. It was colder than ice, a deep, soul-sapping cold that made her hands ache even through the thick gloves she wore. They buried it in a shallow pit, covering it with the stones to form a small, unremarkable cairn. They scattered leaves and forest debris over the blue moss, trying to break up its unnatural perfection. It was a desperate, crude measure, but it was all they had. That night, as Eric lay resting his aching head, Anya sat by the entrance of their shelter, watching the cairn through the night vision scope. The forest had returned to its normal state, the birds and insects chirping and buzzing as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. She thought about the entity, the thing of compressed silence. It hadn't felt malicious. It had felt curious. It was simply acting according to its nature, expanding its own reality into the space the coal had provided. The gaunt men, too, were just doing their job, a brutal, clinical maintenance of a border they believed must not be crossed. And we are the fools in the middle, she thought, who think a story is worth the risk of the world. A soft crunch of a footstep on pine needles. Her breath caught. She slowly lowered the scope. A woman stood at the edge of their camp. She was not gaunt, but she shared the same otherworldly stillness. She wore practical, dark clothing, and her hair was streaked with gray. Her eyes, however, were different. They were not dead. They were tired, deeply tired, and held a spark of something that looked like pity. "The cairn is a good instinct," the woman said. Her voice was soft, but it carried perfectly in the quiet. It won tea stopped them, of course. They will sweep this area with resonators in a matter of days. "Who are you?" Anya whispered, not daring to wake Eric. "My name is Alara," the woman said. "I was, for a time, one of them, a corrector. Now I am something else. A librarian, perhaps. I believe, like you, that some stories should not be erased." She took a step closer, her hands open and empty. "You have awakened a custodian, and you have damaged the quarantine team. You have made yourselves a part of this. You cannot unsee it. What do you want?" Eric's voice was rough from behind Anya. He was awake, his hand on his rifle. Alara looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "I want to give you a choice. You can stay here and wait for the next, more thorough team to arrive. They will take the artifact, and they will sanitize this location. And you along with it. Or you can come with me. You can learn what that thing truly is. You can learn how to protect it, not just hide it." Eric and Anya exchanged a long look. The safety of their old lives was a distant memory, a shore they could never swim back to. The cairn before them was a grave for a dog, a marker for a secret, and the first page of a new, terrifying chapter, where Anya asked. Alara allowed a faint, sad smile. "To the margins, to the places where the world is thin. We have much to discuss, starting with what else came through during that energy surge. It wasn't just the one entity you saw." She gestured toward the dark, quiet trees beyond their camp. Something else is out there. Something that learned the shape of this world from the shattering of the arch. And it is not silent. Eric's blood ran cold. He followed Alara's gaze into the impenetrable darkness between the trees. The normal night sounds, which had been a comfort moments before, now felt like a mask hiding a predator. "What do you mean, something else?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. The feedback blast was a moment of profound instability. Alara explained, her eyes still scanning the forest. A door was slammed shut, but not before a draft blew through. The entity you saw was a scout, a simple thing of instinct. What escaped in the chaos was a fragment, a shard of consciousness from the other side. It is alone, disoriented, and it is trying to understand this reality by mimicking it. Mimicking how? Anya asked, her scientific mind latching onto the detail despite her fear. "It will seek patterns," Alara said. "It will find a source of information and try to replicate it. A bird's song, a wolf's howl, the sound of the wind. But it does not have the context. It will get things wrong." As if on cue, a sound drifted from the woods. It was the cry of a loon, a familiar, haunting call across the water. But this one was wrong. It was a perfect replication of the first 3 notes. Then it fractured, sliding into a dissonant, metallic shriek that echoed for a moment too long before being cut off. The forest fell utterly silent again, as if every living thing had frozen in terror. "It's here," Alara said, her calm finally showing a crack of urgency. "It is learning, and it is hungry for more data. It will be drawn to complex patterns, to language, to thought." Eric thought of his cabin a few miles away, of his books, his radio, the dense and complicated noise of human existence. It's a lure, he realized. Our world is a feast for it. "We have to go," Anya said, already gathering their few essentials. "Now." Alara nodded. "Follow me, and do not listen to it. Its voice is a hook." They moved quickly and quietly, abandoning their shelter. Alara led them not down the path toward Eric's cabin, but deeper into the trackless wilderness, toward the higher, rockier ground. The forest was a cathedral of watchful silence around them. Every rustle of their own footsteps sounded like a thunderclap. After 20 minutes of brutal, breathless hiking, another sound began to weave through the trees. It was a voice, faint and distant. It was Jeremy's voice. "Eric, help me. I am lost. I am so cold." Eric stopped dead, his heart clenching in his chest. It was perfect. It was the very sound he had dreamed of for a year. "Dante," Alara whispered, her hand clamping on his arm with surprising strength. "It's a recording. It's pulling the memory from you." The voice came again, closer now, from a thicket of birch trees to their left. "Brother, please, I found my way back." Tears streamed down Eric's face, but he forced his feet to move, following Anya and Alara. The voice began to change, to distort. It started repeating the same phrase, "Help me," over and over, but the pitch was wrong. sliding up and down the scale unnaturally. Then it began to mix with other sounds, the frantic turning of pages from the journal, a burst of static from a dead radio signal, a fragment of a lullaby Anya had been humming the night before. It was building a collage of their minds, a horrific symphony of stolen thoughts and memories. It getting faster. Anya breathed, her own composure breaking. It learning how to put the pieces together. It knows we are the most complex things it has encountered, Alara said, her pace quickening. It will not let us go easily. They broke into a run, scrambling up a steep, rocky slope. The cacophony followed them, a swirling vortex of sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was trying to talk, to form words from the fragments it had stolen. The result was a chaotic, desperate babble that clawed at the edges of their sanity. At the top of the ridge, Alara stopped at the mouth of a narrow fissure in the rock, almost invisible behind a curtain of hanging vines. In here, quickly, they scrambled into the dark, narrow opening. The chaotic noise from outside lessened, muted by the thick stone. Alara led them down a short, tight passage that opened into a small, dry cavern. A single, battery-powered lantern sat on a rock, casting long shadows. "We can wait here," she said, her chest heaving. It is a place of old stone. The patterns are too deep and slow for it to parse easily. It will linger, but it will not find us. Eric slumped against the cave wall, listening to the distorted echo of his brother S. voice slowly fade away into the night. They were safe for the moment, but the thing was still out there, a newborn intelligence of stolen voices and broken sounds, learning how to speak to a world it was never meant to inhabit. And Eric knew, with a cold certainty, that it would not stop until it had someone to talk to. Story 3. The house at the end of Hemlock Street was swallowing itself. Jimmy noticed it first, though he couldn't have explained it, not in words that would make sense to his parents or his teachers. It was a feeling in his gut, a cold, wriggling thing that had nothing to do with the October chill. The porch, which last week had been a normal, welcoming rectangle, now seemed to stretch away from the front door like a slack jaw, the floorboards tilting at a nauseating angle. The windows, once symmetrical eyes on the face of the house, were different sizes, the left one squinting, the right one bulging wide as if in surprise. It wasn't something you saw if you looked directly. It was something you caught in the periphery of your vision, a wrongness that snapped back into a semblance of order the moment you tried to focus. The house was breathing, and it was a sick, irregular breath. This was the autumn of their 12th year, the last autumn of childhood, though they did not know it. The days were short and getting shorter, the dark arriving by 5:00 with a finality that felt ancient. The town of Harvest Falls was draped in the gaudy shroud of the season. Every porch held a grinning, leering, or sorrowful jack-o'-lantern, their candle-lit souls flickering as the sun died. Synthetic cobwebs clung to hedges, and plastic skeletons dangled from eaves, their poses a little too animated when the wind caught them. The air was a potent brew of burning leaves from tidy pyres at the curb, the waxy perfume of melting candle stubs, and the sweet, spiced ghost of baking from open kitchen windows. It was a time of masks, and not just the cheap plastic ones hanging in the drugstore. Jimmy gathered his friends in their fortress, a dugout hollow beneath the weeping willow in the vacant lot on Cypress Avenue. The space was just large enough for the 7 of them, a secret council of the soon-to-be-lost. The earth was cool and smelled of damp roots and decay. The light, filtered through the willow's yellowing curtain, was the color of old parchment. The Miller place, Jimmy said, his voice low. He was their leader not because he was the biggest or the loudest, but because he was the stillest, the one who watched and weighed things. It's wrong. David, small for his age, with a nervous stutter that clung to his words like burrs, nodded frantically. It's too big on the inside. I saw the D doorway. It's just an old house, dummy, said Casey, the group's jester. He flicked a piece of gravel, probably just settling. My dad says all the houses on Hemlock are built on a spring, but his usual grin was absent, replaced by a tightness around his mouth. Charlotte, her hair the color of fallen leaves, hugged her knees. The pumpkins on their porch, she whispered. They weren't carved. They were bleeding. A thick, black sap from the eyes. Jeff, the intellectual, adjusted his glasses. Plant rot. A specific fungal infection, probably. It's not uncommon. But his notebook was open on his lap, and he wasn't writing about fungi. He was drawing the house, over and over, the lines never quite meeting, the perspective always skewed. Gale said nothing. He never said much. His silence was a deep well dug by the car accident that had taken his parents 2 winters ago. He just stared at the wall of the dugout, his fingers tracing the shape of a candle flame in the dirt. Over and over. A candle, a shadow, a heartbeat. Brent, the outcast, the boy with the too short trousers, and the smell of stale cigarettes clinging to his coat, spoke from the edge of the group. My dog won't go near it. He whines and pulls his leash. He started yesterday. He looked at Jimmy, his eyes desperate for belief. And last night, I saw a clown standing under the streetlight across from it, just standing there, not moving. A collective shiver passed through them, colder than the October air. A clown. It was too perfect, too storybook a monster, and that made it worse. It felt like a mockery of their fear, a costume chosen from the deepest, most childish part of their nightmares. The days bled towards Halloween, each one shorter, each night longer and more profound. The dread was a low hum beneath the town's festive cacophony. They began to see the patterns. The signs they would later understand were omens. The scarecrow in Old Man Henderson's cornfield. Its head was a different direction each morning. The burlap sack face seeming to track their progress down the road. The black cat that belonged to no one, that would appear on fence posts, and stare at them with eyes that held a knowledge far too old for an animal. The way the corn maze at the edge of town, a yearly attraction, seemed to have grown, its paths shifting when no one was looking, the rustle of the dried stalks sounding less like wind and more like whispering. They decided to call it the Glimmer. It was Casey's name, a joke that stuck because the wrongness of the thing was just that a shimmer at the edge of reality, a flaw in the film. It could be a clown one moment, a tall, thin man with too many teeth the next, a shadow that detached itself from a tree, or the familiar, hated face of a school bully who had moved away last year. It was a shapeshifter, a thing of the threshold, and Halloween was the ultimate threshold. The veil was thinning, and the glimmer was pressing against it from the other side. Their investigation was a patchwork of childhood logic and desperate courage. They skipped school to watch the Miller house, noting how the mailman never lingered, how the paperboy threw the rolled-up news from the sidewalk as if the lawn were mined. They saw the clown again, this time in the storm drain at the end of Hemlock, its painted smile a red gash in the gloom, its body folded into the round concrete pipe in a way that bones should not allow. It did not chase them. It just watched them run, its stillness more terrifying than any pursuit. The revelations came in fragments, like pieces of a shattered jack-o'-lantern. Jeff, spending hours in the town-s microfiche archives at the library, found the history. The land under Hemlock Street was once a bog, a place the original settlers avoided. They called it the Slick, a place where the ground was unsure, where things could be swallowed and never found. The first disappearance was recorded in 1892. A child last seen chasing a ball into the reeds. There was one every generation, almost always in the week leading up to Halloween. 1921, 1955, 1988. The dates were a ghostly countdown. The town had built over the fear, paved it, named the street after a poisonous tree, and forgotten. But the glimmer remembered. Charlotte, with her preternatural sensitivity, felt its hunger. She described it as a hollow space, a vacuum that pulled at everything around it. "It doesn't just take people," she said, her voice trembling as they huddled in the dugout, the wind moaning through the willow branches above. "It takes their shape, their fear. It wears them. It us learning what we ray afraid of." Gale finally spoke, his voice a rusty hinge. "It showed me my mom." The sentence hung in the cold air, a confession of unbearable cruelty. In the window, she was crying. She waved for me to come inside. On October 30th, the day before the pinnacle, the town was a riot of forced merriment. Orange and black crepe paper fluttered from lampposts. Children in half-assembled costumes darted across lawns. The air was thick with the smell of sugar and fake smoke from fog machines. But for the 7 children, the festive decorations were a lie. The jack-o'-lanterns were severed heads, their grins malignant. The plastic skeletons were not plastic at all, but waiting, patient things. The laughter of other children sounded sharp and brittle, like breaking glass. That night, they made their plan. It was simple, hopelessly so. They would go into the Miller house. They would find the heart of the glimmer, the source of the sickness. They would face it together. They armed themselves with flashlights. A can of pepper spray Casey had swiped from his mom's purse, and their fragile, desperate bond. The door to the Miller house was unlocked. It swung inward without a sound, revealing a hallway that defied physics. It was too long, stretching away into a darkness their flashlight beams could not pierce. The walls were covered in a wallpaper of faded lilacs, but the patterns swam and twisted if you stared too long. The floor tilted, first one way, then another. A slow, nauseating roll. The smell was the worst part, not dust and decay, but the sweet, cloying scent of rotting pumpkins, mixed with the electric tang of ozone, and something else, something metallic and old, like a copper penny held on the tongue. They moved in a tight knot, their breath pluming in the unnatural cold. David S. Stutter had vanished, frozen away by a terror so pure it left no room for social anxiety. He just gripped Jimmy S. sleeve, his knuckles white. They passed a sitting room. In an armchair sat a figure, its back to them. It was the clown. Its head slowly turned, a full 180 degrees, the rictus grin fixed on them. But the face beneath the paint was David S., contorted in a silent scream. They ran. The hallway branched, then branched again, a fractal nightmare of doors and corridors that led nowhere. The house was a labyrinth, a living, breathing trap. A door creaked open to their left, and they saw Casey S. father, his face a mask of disappointment. "You'll never be anything, Casey," the thing said with his father's voice. Casey flinched as if struck. Another door revealed Jeff's greatest fear, a vast, empty library, all the books blank. Another showed Gail's parents, not as he remembered them, but as they were in the casket, their skin waxy and stitched. The glimmer was a mirror, reflecting the specific, curated horrors of their souls. It was learning from them, feeding on them, becoming them. They found themselves in a vast, central space that could not possibly exist within the dimensions of the house. It was a cavern, the walls not wood and plaster, but the wet, dark earth of the slick. Roots hung from the ceiling like veins, and in the center of the room was a pile, a mountain of discarded forms. A scarecrow-s overalls, a clown-s wig, a bully-s Letterman jacket, the smiling face of a mother, the stern visage of a father all lay in a heap, deflated and empty, like shed skins. And from the pile, it rose. It had no true form. It was a swirl of darkness, a coalescence of every shadow they had ever seen from the corner of their eye. It had the long limbs of the clown, the hollow eyes of the scarecrow, the hungry mouth of the glimmer. It was the essence of the threshold, the thing that waits in the liminal space, the consumer of identities. "It wants a new one," Jimmy said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "It's hungry. Halloween is its feast. It's been taking one every generation, but it's getting stronger. The town it's built on its feeding ground." The thing lunged. It was not a lunge of body, but of space. The room contracted, the darkness rushing at them. Brent screamed and threw his flashlight. It passed through the form and clattered against the earth wall, its beam dying. The pepper spray was a useless mist. Their weapons were toys against this ancient, cosmic hunger. It was Charlotte who understood. "It takes our fear." She shouted over the rising wind that came from nowhere. "It uses it. Don T be afraid." It was an impossible command. But Jimmy looked at his friends, at David S. paralyzed terror, at Casey S. broken spirit, at Jeff S. shattered logic, at Gail S. bottomless grief, at Brent S. desperate need to belong, and at Charlotte S. raw, bleeding empathy. He saw not their fear, but what lay beneath it, their friendship. It was the one thing the glimmer could not mimic, could not consume, because it had never known it. Together, Jimmy yelled, and he reached out, grabbing David's hand. David, shaking, grabbed Casey with a last defiant spark in his eyes, grabbed Jeff S. one by one. They linked hands, a chain of 7 in the swallowing dark. They stood their ground, not as individuals defined by their separate fears, but as a single entity, a bulwark of shared experience. The glimmer hesitated. Its form flickered. It reached for them, a tendril of absolute blackness, but it could find no purchase. It could not find Jimmy S. fear of failure, because David S. loyalty was there. It could not find David S. fear of being mocked, because Casey S. humor protected him. It could not break the circle. It recoiled, hissing, a sound like steam and tearing silk. The house groaned. The walls of earth began to crumble. The false reality it had built was collapsing, unable to sustain itself in the face of their united, fearless love. "Run!" Jimmy screamed. They fled back through the shifting corridors, which were now shuddering and collapsing, the lilac wallpaper peeling away in great strips. They burst out of the front door just as the porch gave way behind them, collapsing into a sinkhole of churning, black mud. They didn't stop running until they were back in the vacant lot, under the cold, impartial gaze of the harvest moon. They stood there, 7 children clinging to each other in the silvered light, watching the distant emergency lights flicker blue and red on Hemlock Street. The Miller house was gone, swallowed by the slick. The official story would be a catastrophic sinkhole, a tragic fluke of geology. They never spoke of it again, not to anyone else. The bond they shared was a secret buried deeper than the glimmer. They grew up as children do. Jimmy became a contractor, and he always checked the soil reports. David became a speech therapist. Casey did stand-up comedy. Jeff wrote obscure philosophical texts. Charlotte became a therapist. Gail found a quiet peace in woodworking. Brent found a family that loved him. But every October, as the light failed and the air grew sharp, they would feel it. The memory was a cold stone in the pocket of the soul. They would see a flicker of movement in a storm drain, a scarecrow that seemed a little too attentive, a clown poster that made their breath catch. They would watch their own children carve pumpkins, the candlelight dancing in their innocent eyes, and a chill would trace their spines. They had won, but it was a stalemate, not a victory. They had not destroyed the glimmer. They had only reminded it to be more careful, for the glimmer was not of the house, or the slick, or even the town. It was of the threshold. It was the thing that happened in the space between one heartbeat and the next, in the shadow the jack-o'-lantern casts, in the moment of silence after the doorbell rings, and before the door is opened. It was the ancient fear given form on the one night when the veil is tissue thin. It was the true meaning of Halloween, the hunger waiting in the dark, patient and eternal. And somewhere in the rustle of the dead leaves, in the flicker of a candle guttering out, in the distant, fading laughter of a child in a mask, it is still waiting. The story never truly ends. The following spring, a new family moved onto Hemlock Street, into a modern prefab house erected over the filled-in sinkhole. They were cheerful, oblivious, and they planted a garden of bright, hardy flowers that bloomed with aggressive normality. The children of the 7 would sometimes play together in that yard, their laughter echoing the sounds their parents had once made. Jimmy S.'s son, Leo, and Charlotte S.'s daughter, Mia, were especially close. A new generation S unbreakable link. It was Mia who saw it first. She was 8, the same age her mother had been when the glimmer first began to stir. She was lying on her stomach in the grass, watching a line of ants march towards the foundation of the house when she noticed it. A single, perfect dandelion had grown up between 2 patio stones. It was not yellow, but a pale, sickly white, and from its center, a drop of something thick and black, like sap, welled up and dripped onto the concrete. She didn't tell the adults. They got a certain look in their eyes, a distant, guarded expression, whenever Hemlock Street was mentioned. Instead, she told Leo. And Leo, who had his father's stillness and his mother's fierce heart, went and looked for himself. He saw the dandelion. He also saw how the new house, from the corner of his eye, seemed to warp the air around it, like heat haze on a summer road, but cold. That night, as their parents sat in Charlotte's living room, talking in the low, comfortable murmurs of shared history, Leo and Mia slipped out the back door. They stood at the edge of the property, looking at the house on the filled-in lot. The streetlight above it flickered, not with a faulty bulb, but with a rhythmic, almost organic dimming, like a pulse. "It's not gone," Leo whispered. Mia shook her head, her small face serious. "It's just being quiet. It's learning." From the shadow of the neighbor's tall fence, something shifted. It was not a clown, or a scarecrow, or a lost parent. It was smaller, simpler. It was the shape of a child, a silhouette cut from the absolute blackness between the slats of the fence. It had no features, no details, just a humanoid outline that stood perfectly still, observing them. It was a new shape, a shape for a new generation. Leo felt an old, cold fear, one that was not his own, but was inherited, passed down like a family heirloom. He reached out and took Mia's hand. Her fingers were small and warm in his. They stood there, 2 children against the deepening twilight, linked together just as their parents had been. They did not run. They just watched the small, dark shape, and the shape watched them back. The game was not over. It had simply been reset. And the players were new. The silence between them was heavy, a shared understanding that settled over their small shoulders. The thing in the shadows did not advance. It did not change its form. It was simply a presence, a statement. We are both still here. Inside, the laughter of their parents was a muffled, distant sound, a memory of a safety they now knew was an illusion. Leo squeezed Mia's hand once, a silent signal, and they began to back away slowly, their eyes locked on the dark silhouette. With each step, the oppressive feeling lessened, but it did not vanish. It remained as a residue, a stain on the periphery of the quiet street. They did not speak until they were back on Charlotte S. porch, the warm light from the window falling on their faces. The ordinary world felt thin, like a painted backdrop. "We can tell them," Mia said, her voice firm for an 8-year-old. She looked through the glass at her mother, who was smiling at something Jimmy had said. It would break their hearts. Leo nodded. He understood the weight of it, the burden of a secret kept to protect the ones you love. He looked down at his hand, still feeling the ghost of the cold that had emanated from the shadow child. It knows, we saw it. The following day at school, the world was bright and loud and normal. But their normal had been fractured. They watched the other children playing tag, their fears simple and immediate a test, a scolding, a skinned knee. Leo and Mia's fear was a patient, ancient thing, and it had their address. They began their own quiet investigation, a pale echo of their parents' childhood crusade. They spent afternoons at the town library, not in the adult sections with the microfiche, but in the children's corner, looking at books of local history and folklore. They found a drawing in an old book about settler myths. It depicted a bog spirit, a formless thing that was said to mimic the voices of lost children to lure others into the mud. The description was vague, but the feeling was the same. They learned the new family's name was Carter. They had a baby, a little boy who was always laughing. Mia would watch the mother, Mrs. Carter, hanging bright-colored laundry on the line, her movements brisk and happy. She felt a pang of something terrible, a protective dread. The glimmer was in their yard, under their house, and they had no idea. A week later, Leo was taking out the trash when he saw Mr. Carter in his driveway, staring at his car with a puzzled expression. The side of the white sedan was streaked with long, vertical lines of that same black, sap-like substance. It looked like filthy tears. Kids, probably, Mr. Carter muttered to himself, not seeing Leo. Sticky fingers. Leo knew it wasn't kids. He went to the spot where Mia had seen the dandelion. It was gone, replaced by a patch of bare, dark earth that looked unnaturally smooth, as if something had been sucked straight down. The manifestations were subtler this time. There were no clowns, no shifting hallways. It was a series of small, correctable wrongnesses. A child's toy left in the yard would be found in a different spot the next morning. The Carter's baby would wake up crying, not with a scream of fright, but with low, confused whimpers, as if he had a bad dream he couldn't understand. The streetlight on the corner developed a consistent, slow flicker that the city workers could never seem to fix. The glimmer was being careful. It was learning from its last defeat. It was not launching an assault of terror, but an infiltration of unease. It was seeping into the foundations of the new house, into the routines of the new family. A slow poison instead of a sudden bite. On the last day of school before summer break, Leo and Mia sat under the same willow tree in the vacant lot where their parents had once hidden. The air was warm and thick, with the smell of cut grass, a world away from the chill of October. "It's getting stronger," Mia said quietly. "It's not just showing itself to us anymore. It's touching their things." Leo plucked a blade of grass and split it carefully with his thumbnail. He was thinking of his father, Jimmy, who built things, and of the soil reports he studied so diligently. He thought of the slick, still there, sleeping under the fill dirt and the new foundation. "It's waiting for Halloween," Leo said. "It's always waiting for Halloween. But it's practicing first." They looked at each other, a silent pact forming between them. They were the new guardians of a terrible secret. They had no plan, no weapons, only the knowledge passed down through a shared glance and the unbreakable bond of their friendship. The long, bright days of summer stretched out before them, but in their hearts they could already feel the chill of autumn and the patient, watchful presence in the shadows, learning its new part for the coming season. The first true test came in mid-July. The Carters had a backyard barbecue, the air rich with the smell of charcoal and burgers. Laughter and the clinking of drinks echoed from their yard. Leo and Mia were in Mia's treehouse, a vantage point that overlooked the Carter property. They watched the baby, Sam, crawling on a blanket in the shade. As the sun dipped lower, casting long, distorted shadows from the new fence, Sam stopped his babbling. He became very still, his head cocked. He was looking at a patch of deep shadow near the base of the house, a place where the sun never quite reached. He began to coo, reaching a chubby hand out towards the darkness. From their perch, Leo and Mia saw it. The shadow shifted. It wasn't the child shape this time. It was something softer, more fluid. It gathered itself, pulling darkness like cloth, and for a moment, it formed the silhouette of a large, friendly-looking dog. It was a perfect, harmless shape, designed for a child. Sam giggled and crawled a few inches off the blanket towards it. Mia's breath hitched. "No," she whispered. Leo was already scrambling down the treehouse ladder. He didn't have a plan, only a desperate, instinctual need to break the connection. He landed hard on the grass and ran, not towards Sam, but towards the patio where a portable speaker was playing cheerful pop music. He fumbled with the buttons, his heart hammering against his ribs. The music cut out with a squawk of static. In the sudden silence, everyone turned. Mr. Carter looked up from the grill. Mrs. Carter paused, a plate in her hand. Sam, startled by the abrupt quiet and the shift in attention, stopped his crawling and began to fuss. The shadow under the house dissolved, melting back into a simple, ordinary patch of shade. Leo stood frozen, the speaker in his hand, feeling the weight of all the adult eyes on him. "Sorry," he mumbled, his face burning. "I slipped." Later, as the party wound down, Charlotte came out to find him sitting on the back steps. "You okay, sweetie?" she asked, her voice laced with a concern that felt deeper than the moment deserved. Leo just nodded, unable to meet her eyes. He could feel the truth pressing against his teeth, a terrifying secret. He looked past his mother to the now empty spot where the shadow dog had been. The glimmer wasn't just practicing its scares. It was practicing its lures. It was learning how to be inviting. And that was so much worse. The incident at the barbecue changed the rules of their quiet war. The glimmer was no longer a monster in the dark. It was a predator learning camouflage. The following week, Mia found a small, hand-sewn doll on her windowsill. It was made of gray felt and had no face, but it was placed neatly, as if it were a gift. She threw it in the trash, but the next day it was back, sitting on her pillow. They tried to tell themselves it was just a prank, a coincidence. But the air in their houses began to feel thin and used, like the air in a room that had been sealed for too long. Leo's dad, Jimmy, would sometimes pause while reading the paper, a faint line of confusion on his forehead, as if he heard a distant, familiar sound. Charlotte would hug Mia a little tighter at night, her eyes scanning the dark hallway over her daughter's shoulder. The glimmer was no longer content to lurk at the edges. It was testing the perimeter of the new generation, probing for a weakness. It was looking for a way in, not through a door, but through a moment of inattention, a flicker of doubt. One afternoon, while they were bravely attempting to build a fort in Leo's basement, Mia stopped, a cardboard box in her hands. "It knows our parents beat it," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the concrete-walled room. "It's not trying to scare us like it scared them. It's trying to separate us." Leo thought of the shadow dog, designed to lure a baby. He thought of the faceless doll, a thing meant for a little girl. It's trying to give us our own fears, he realized. Personal ones, so we can link hands. The truth of it settled in the cool, dusty air of the basement. Their parents had faced a single, overwhelming terror together. They were facing a subtle, dividing enemy. How could they stand together if their fears were all different, tailored just for them? The answer came on a rainy August evening. Leo was helping his mother put away groceries when a news bulletin flashed on the kitchen TV. The screen showed the Carter house. The reporter, standing under an umbrella, spoke of a tragedy. Little Sam Carter had been found wandering alone on the sidewalk, confused but unharmed. His parents were frantic. They insisted he had been in his crib, that the baby gate at the top of the stairs had been latched. There There was no explanation for how the 1-year-old had gotten out of his room, down the stairs, and out the front door. Leo's blood ran cold. He didn't hear the rest of the report. He saw it in his mind as clearly as if he had been there. A friendly shadow, taking a familiar shape, coaxing the baby, unlatching the gate, leading him outside into the dark, wet night. It wasn't an attack. It was a demonstration, a show of power, a proof that it could get to anyone, even a child who knew no fear, and that it could do so without making a sound. He met Mia's eyes the next day at school, and he saw that she knew too. The game had escalated. The glimmer was no longer just practicing. It was showing them what it could do. It was proving that their silent vigil was useless. The hunger was back, and it was starting with the smallest, most vulnerable member of the new family on its land. The feast was preparing itself, and the first course was being served. The rain continued for 3 days, a steady gray curtain that seemed to wash all the color from the world. The incident with the Carter baby was the main topic of conversation, but only on the surface. People spoke of faulty latches and the incredible cunning of toddlers. But Leo and Mia saw the looks that passed between their parents, a silent, grim communication that had nothing to do with baby-proofing. The old fear was awake in them, too, a sleeping beast stirred by a familiar scent on the wind. Brent, who found a family that loved him, showed up at Jimmy's door one evening, his face pale. He didn't say much, just stood in the doorway, water dripping from his jacket. "I had a dream," he said to Jimmy. The slick was back. It was talking, but not in a voice. It was using Sam's laugh. Jimmy, the contractor, just nodded and gripped his old friend's shoulder. There were no words. The network of their shared past, once a source of comfort, was now humming with a shared dread. Leo and Mia knew they were running out of time. The slow, careful approach was over. The glimmer had made its move. They had to make theirs. They needed to understand what it wanted now, in this new time, with these new people. They needed to see its face. Their chance came on a night when the rain had finally ceased, leaving the world glistening and unnaturally quiet. The Carter's house was dark, the family having gone to stay with Mrs. Carter's sister for a few days. The street was a long, black ribbon under the intermittent glow of the flickering streetlight. They met at the edge of the property, 2 small figures in the vast, damp dark. They had no tools, no plan, only a desperate need to look their enemy in the eye. They slipped through a gap in the fence and stood on the damp lawn, the new house looming over them, its windows like blind eyes. For a long time, nothing happened. The only sound was the drip of water from the leaves. Then, a soft scraping noise came from the side of the house, near the foundation. They turned, hearts thudding. The patch of bare earth where the dandelion had been was now a shallow, muddy hole. And from it, something was emerging. It was not the child shape, or the dog, or any single thing. It was a patch of deeper darkness that bled up from the ground, and as it rose, it began to pull shapes from the night around it. It drew the wet sheen from the grass, the stark white of a garden gnome's hat, the skeletal pattern of the wet fence. It was a collage of the ordinary, a patchwork monster made of the very stuff of Hemlock Street. It had no fixed form, its outline shimmering and reconfiguring with a soft, rustling sound, like pages turning in a book. It was learning to use the whole environment, not just the old, easy fears. It took a step towards them, a movement that was less a step and more a reallocation of shadow and reflected light. It was beautiful and terrifying, a living piece of the neighborhood given a single, hungry purpose. It was showing them its true nature. It was the threshold, the space between, and it could wear any face, any shape that the street could provide. Leo felt Mia's hand find his, her grip cold and tight. They stood their ground as the patchwork darkness drifted closer, a kaleidoscope of familiar things made alien. It stopped a few feet away, and from its shifting center, a sound emerged. It was the sound of the Carter's baby, Sam, gurgling with innocent delight. The sound was perfect, and it was coming from the heart of the abomination. The message was clear. This was not the glimmer of old. It was not just a hunter of fear. It was a thief of innocence, a mimic of comfort, a poison that could hide in the most harmless of sounds. It had evolved, and it was hungry for the new world it found itself in. The gurgle hung in the air, a perversion of something pure. The patchwork shape did not advance further. It simply held its form, a shifting tapestry of the street's own components, and let the sound do its work. It was a display of power, a demonstration of its new, intimate understanding of its prey. Leo's mind, usually so logical, scrabbled for purchase. This wasn't a monster you could hit or outrun. It was an atmosphere, a sickness in the soil. He thought of his father's soil reports, the dense technical language about composition and stability. This thing was the opposite of stable. It was chaos wearing the mask of order. Mia was the one who moved. She took a single step forward, her small body trembling, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "We see you," she said to the shimmering darkness. "We know what you are." The baby's gurgle cut off instantly. In its place came a new sound, a dry, rustling whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was the sound of the willow tree's branches in the vacant lot, the sound of dead leaves skittering across pavement. The sound formed a single, clear word. Guardians. The word was not spoken, but woven from the night itself. It was an acknowledgement and a challenge. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, the patchwork shape dissolved. The darkness retreated, flowing back into the muddy hole like water down a drain. The garden gnome was just a garden gnome again. The fence was just a fence. The oppressive weight lifted, leaving behind only the cool, damp air and the frantic beating of their own hearts. They stood there for a long time, staring at the empty patch of earth. The glimmer had not just shown them its face, it had spoken to them. It had named them. Back in Leo's room, with the door closed and a lamp casting a warm, safe glow, the full implication settled over them. "It knows we Ray the ones watching," Mia whispered, pulling her knees to her chest. "It knows we Ray trying to stop it." Leo nodded, staring at his hands. "It's not hiding from us anymore. It's engaging." He thought of the way it had used Sam's laugh, the way it had formed itself from the street. It's making this personal. It's making the whole street its weapon. The following morning, the Carter family returned. From his window, Leo watched them unpack their car. Mr. Carter carried a sleeping Sam, his face drawn and tired. Mrs. Carter looked nervously at their house, as if the building itself had betrayed them. The Glimmer-S demonstration had worked. It had sown a deep, quiet terror in the hearts of the new family, a perfect fertilizer for whatever it planned to grow. The long, hot days of late summer took on a new, grim purpose. Leo and Mia were no longer just observers. They were participants in a silent dialogue with the thing under the house. They began to notice smaller, more precise changes. The pattern of the sprinkler S spray on the Carter lawn would sometimes, for just a moment, freeze into a perfect, unmoving arc of water before continuing. The mailman would sometimes pause at their mailbox, a confused look on his face, as if he'd already delivered the mail, and couldn't he remember doing it. The Glimmer was practicing its control, refining its ability to manipulate the mundane. It was learning to bend the rules of the world just enough to create a constant, low-grade dissonance. It was tuning the street like an instrument, and they were the only ones who could hear the discordant note. One evening, Leo found his father in the garage, staring at a set of blueprints for a new housing development on the other side of town. He wasn't studying them. He was just standing there, his hand resting on the paper. "Dad," Leo said. Jimmy started, then looked down at his son. For a fleeting second, Leo saw a deep, old fear in his father's eyes, a ghost from a childhood Halloween. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a weary smile. "Just thinking, kiddo," Jimmy said, "about the ground. You have to know what you Ray building on. You have to be sure." Leo looked at the blueprint, then back at his father. He knew they weren't just talking about houses anymore. The foundation was cracking. The guardians were children, and the thing in the earth was wide awake, patiently weaving its new web, waiting for the leaves to turn. And the one night of the year when the threshold between worlds was at its thinnest, the first day of school should have been a relief, a return to the normal world of fluorescent lights and ringing bells. But for Leo and Mia, the crowded hallways felt like a fragile illusion. They moved through the noise and chatter like ghosts, seeing the signs everywhere. Sarah Jennings burst into tears for no reason in the middle of homeroom. A flicker of darkness, too fast for anyone else to notice, darted across the ceiling of the gymnasium during assembly. The Glimmer was no longer confined to Hemlock Street. It was testing its reach. They found a new ally in the most unlikely of places. Brent's son, a lanky, quiet boy named Elijah, who was a year older than them, sought them out at lunch. He slid into the seat opposite them, his lunch tray untouched. "My dad talks in his sleep," he said without preamble, his voice low. "He says words like slick and willow. He woke up last night screaming about a laughing baby." Elijah's eyes, the same shade of worried blue as his father S, fixed on them. "He thinks it's just nightmares. But it's not, is it?" Leo and Mia exchanged a glance. The secret was no longer just theirs. The network was expanding, not through words, but through shared dread passed down like a cursed inheritance. They nodded, and in that simple gesture, a new, heavier pact was formed. They were 3 now. After school, the 3 of them stood at the edge of the vacant lot. The old willow tree seemed to watch them, its branches stirring in a breeze that didn't touch the rest of the street. "It's getting into our houses," Mia said, her voice tight. "Into our parents' dreams. It's trying to get to them through us, or through what they remember." Elijah kicked at a clump of dirt. "My dad keeps checking the locks on the doors and windows. He says it's just a habit, but he's scared, really scared." Leo looked from the vacant lot to the Carter house, and then to his own home. The glimmer was no longer a single entity in a single place. It was a stain seeping through the neighborhood. It was in the locked doors, the nervous glances, the forgotten chores, the unexplained sadness. It was feeding on the very atmosphere of fear it created, growing stronger, not just for Halloween, but for a permanent return. The thought was a cold stone in his gut. They weren't just trying to stop a Halloween haunting. They were trying to stop a takeover. The threshold wasn't just a door to be opened on one night. The glimmer was working to dissolve it completely, to make their world and its world one and the same. And it was using their own memories, their own families, their own street, as the tools to do it. The 3 of them started meeting every day after school. A small, solemn council of war held in Leo's basement, or Mia's treehouse. They compared notes, documenting every flicker, every misplaced object, every bad dream. The evidence was a terrifying mosaic. The glimmer was a subtle craftsman, its work visible only if you knew how to look. It was eroding the neighborhood's sense of reality, one small, impossible moment at a time. A plan began to form, born of desperation, and a child's understanding of rules. If the glimmer was a thing of thresholds, then it had to have a center, a home base. The vacant lot and the old willow tree were the obvious heart of it, but the Carter house was its new foothold, its beachhead. They had to push it back, to show it that the new ground was defended. "We need to give it a message of our own," Mia insisted, her small hands clenched into fists. "We need to show it we were not scared." But they were terrified. The bravado was a thin shield. Elijah suggested telling their parents everything, but they all knew how that would go. They would be patted on the head, told they had active imaginations, and the adults' own buried fears would just be driven deeper, making them even more useless. The opportunity to act came on a Friday evening. The Carters were going out for dinner. The first time they left Sam with a babysitter since the incident. Leo saw them drive away from his window, a knot tightening in his stomach. The sitter was a teenage girl from 2 streets over, someone who knew nothing about the history of the land she was sitting on. He texted the group. They ray gone. They met at the fence line, the sky deepening to a bruised purple. The Carter house stood silent, a single light on in the living room, where the babysitter was probably watching TV. "What are we going to do?" Elijah whispered, his face pale. "We ray going to make a line," Leo said, his voice barely audible. He had a plastic bag filled with something from his pocket. It was a mixture of substances he decobbled together from garage shelves and his own frantic research online. Salt from the kitchen, flakes of rust from an old toolbox, and dried out, crushed up dandelions he had desperately gathered from other yards. It was a child's idea of a magic circle, a barrier made of purity, decay, and the one thing that had grown on the Glimmer's own ground. They moved along the property line, the 3 of them, pouring the gritty mixture from the bag in a shaky, continuous line. It was a pathetic gesture, a line of dust and weeds against a power that could reshape the night. But it was all they had. As they worked, a coldness settled over the yard, a pocket of chill air that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. From under the shadow of the Carter house, the darkness began to stir. It didn't form a complex shape this time. It simply pooled and rose, a column of living blackness that absorbed the light from the street lamp. It ignored the line of salt and weeds completely, flowing over it as if it weren't there. It was headed for the house, for the babysitter, for Sam. Panic seized them. Their barrier was a joke. They were fools. But then Mia stepped forward, directly into the path of the advancing darkness. She planted her feet on the lawn, a small, defiant figure in the growing gloom. "No," she said. The word was quiet, but it cut through the silence. The column of darkness paused. It seemed to consider her. Then it changed direction, flowing towards her instead. It didn't rush. It was a slow, inevitable tide. Leo and Elijah watched, frozen, as the glimmer enveloped Mia. For a heart-stopping second, she was gone, swallowed by the absolute blackness. Then a sound emerged from it. Not a baby's laugh or a rustling whisper, but Mia's own voice, twisted with a fear they had never heard in her. "Leo, Elijah, it's so dark in here. Don T, leave me. Please, Don T, leave me alone." The voice was perfect. It was Mia, truly and utterly terrified. It was using their greatest fear against them, the fear of failing each other. Leo felt his legs turn to water. Elijah took a step back, a sob catching in his throat. The glimmer had learned their deepest weakness, and it was holding Mia hostage with it. The feast was not just for it. It was a feast of despair, and it had just served the main course. Leo acted without thinking. He lunged forward, not at the dark column, toward the spot where Mia's voice had originated. He plunged his hands into the chilling blackness, his fingers searching for something solid. He found her arm, cold as marble, and pulled with all his strength. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like tearing silk, Mia stumbled out of the darkness, collapsing onto the wet grass. The column recoiled, its form shimmering with what seemed like surprise. It had not expected a direct, physical rebuttal. It was a creature of psychology and fear, not of grappling hands. Mia was gasping, her eyes wide with a horror that was entirely her own. It was showing me things, she choked out. Empty houses. All of you gone. The glimmer was learning them, studying the architecture of their individual fears to use as blueprints for their despair. It was a more intimate violation than any physical attack. The column of darkness began to dissolve, not retreating to the hole, but simply fading into the general night, its presence dispersing like smoke. The immediate threat was over, but the victory was hollow. They had survived, but they had also been catalogued. The thing knew how to hurt each of them now. They helped Mia to her feet and retreated to the sidewalk, their makeshift barrier utterly forgotten. They huddled together, 3 children shivering in the aftermath. The Carter house remained quiet, the babysitter inside oblivious to the war that had just been fought on the lawn for her safety. "It's not enough to just stand against it," Leo said, his voice raw. "It knows that. It's playing a different game." Elijah, his face grim, nodded. "It's not trying to scare us away. It's trying to break us, to make us give up." Mia, still trembling, looked toward the vacant lot. "It has a center, a heart. My dad and Brent and the others, they fought it once. They must have done something to push it back, but they didn't destroy it," Leo said. "They just made it sleep. Then we have to find out how they did it," Mia insisted, a flicker of her old resolve returning. "We have to find the old rules before it finishes writing the new ones." The walk home was silent. The streetlights hummed, and the shadows between the houses seemed deeper, more deliberate. When Leo slipped back into his house, he found his father in the living room, not watching TV, but just sitting in his chair, staring at the wall. "Everything okay, Dad?" Leo asked, his heart hammering. Jimmy turned, and his smile was a fragile thing. "Just tired, son. The past, it has a way of feeling very close sometimes." He looked at Leo, really looked at him, and for a moment Leo thought he might say something more, something real. But the moment passed. Don T stay up too late. Leo went to his room, the chasm between his world and his father S feeling wider and more dangerous than ever. The adults were living in the shadow of an old story. The children were living inside a new one, a story that was still being written, and the pen was in the hand of a thing that was learning, moment by moment, how to make their world its own. The next day, the air on Hemlock Street felt thick and used, like the silence after a scream. Leo watched his father leave for work, the slump in Jimmy's shoulders more pronounced than ever. He wasn't just carrying the weight of a long shift. He was carrying the weight of a memory he refused to name. Mia was waiting for him on her porch, her face pale but determined. "We need to talk to my dad," she said. "Today, before it gets dark." Elijah met them at the edge of the vacant lot, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "My dad woke up this morning and started checking all the windows for cracks. He said he felt a draft. He looked at the willow tree. There was no draft. Brent's house was a mirror of Leo's, a place where the past was a ghost that haunted the corners of every room. They found him in the garage, meticulously organizing a toolbox, each socket wrench placed with a precision that felt desperate. He looked up as they entered, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't about borrowing a ladder, is it?" he said, his voice flat. Mia stepped forward. "We know about the glimmer, Dad. We know what happened on Halloween, and it's happening again." Brent's face went still. The carefully maintained mask of normalcy cracked, and for a terrifying second, Leo saw the raw, unhealed terror of the boy he had once been. He dropped a wrench with a clatter that echoed in the silent garage. "You don't know what you're talking about," he whispered. But the denial was weak, hollow. "We do," Leo said. "It used Sam's laugh. It spoke to us. It knows we're the guardians." The word hung in the oily air of the garage. Brent leaned heavily against his workbench, the color draining from his face. "Guardians," he repeated, the word a bitter taste in his mouth. "We weren't guardians. We were survivors." "Then tell us how you survived," Mia pleaded. "How did you make it stop?" Brent looked from his daughter's fierce, frightened face to the boy's, and the last of his resistance crumbled. The story came out in a reluctant, pained rush. He spoke of the 7 of them of the dare, of the way the darkness under the willow tree didn't just watch, but reached. He described a hunger that was more than physical, a cold that stole the warmth from your memories. "We didn't fight it," Brent murmured, staring at a grease stain on the concrete floor. "We interrupted it. Your dad, Leo, Jimmy. He was the one who figured it out. He said it was like a circuit. It needed a connection, a focus. The willow tree was its antenna. We broke the connection." "How?" Elijah asked, his voice barely a whisper. Brent's eyes were distant, lost in that long-ago night. "We cut it down, not the whole tree, just the heart of it. A specific branch, the lowest one that touched the ground. Jimmy said it was the root in the air. We sawed it off. We burned it in a trash can in the old Miller place. The second that branch turned to ash, the thing just vanished. It was gone. A fragile, impossible hope bloomed in Leo's chest. So that's it. We just find the branch and burn it." But Brent was already shaking his head, a look of profound despair on his face. "It's not that simple. It didn't die. It went dormant. It was a temporary fix. And that branch's long gone, ashes." "The tree grew back," Mia said, the hope in her voice dying. "It grew back different, Brent corrected her, his gaze drifting toward the garage door, as if he could see the vacant lot through the walls. Twisted, stronger, and so did the thing under it. Whatever we did, it was a one-time trick. It won't work again. It's learned. The truth was a physical blow. The adult's solution was a relic. The old rules were obsolete. The glimmer had adapted, immunizing itself against their only weapon. As they filed out of the garage, defeated, Brent caught Mia's arm. His grip was tight, his eyes blazing with a sudden, fierce intensity. Listen to me, all of you. Stay away from that lot. It's not playing games anymore. It's building something. A new focus. A new heart. He released her and turned back to his toolbox. The conversation clearly over. The three of them stood on the driveway, the summer sun feeling cold on their skin. He's lying, Elijah said quietly. Leo nodded. Brent's fear was real, but his final words had the ring of a rehearsed warning, a story he'd been told to tell. He wasn't just telling us to stay away. He was telling us what it's doing. It's building a new heart. They looked down the street, past the Carter house, to the empty space where the willow tree stood. The glimmer wasn't just hiding in the old ground. It was constructing a new throne from the fear of the new families, from the stolen innocence of a baby's laugh, from the crumbling memories of the fathers who had failed to kill it. They hadn't found a solution in the past. They had only found a new, more terrifying problem. The circuit was almost complete.